Good evening, everyone. A quorum being present, we'll get started with our meeting tonight. First off, I'd like to invite everyone to stand if you're able. We'll say the Pledge of Allegiance and observe a moment of silence, and I believe Councilor Simmons would like to say something.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I hope that we can all rise during our moment of silence to remember Mrs. Muriel Turk. She died last week. She was age 100 years old and has lived half of her life here in Cambridge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Seated. I'm Vice Mayor Devereaux, and I'm sitting in tonight for Mayor McGovern, who will be with us shortly. I would say that the meeting is being recorded with audio and visual aids, and listening devices are available to the public if anyone needs one. We will begin with the submission of the record. Councilor Carlone, would you like to motion for that? Okay, submission of the record for the minutes for the regular City Council meetings, two of them from December 3rd, 2018 and December 10th, 2018. All in favor, say aye. Okay. Moving right along, now is the time when we begin public comment. Members of the public may speak on any item on the agenda except for communications from other members of the public and items on the awaiting report list. Each speaker gets 3 minutes, and you come to the podium, you make sure the little green light is on the microphone, state your name and address, and we will give you a warning when there are 15 seconds left. A little tone will go off, and the speakers' names will be listed up on the board up there. So our first speaker will begin this evening with Melissa Ludke, followed by Susan Ringler.
Push this, yep. Okay, it's on. Hi, I'm Melissa Ludke. I live at 30 Buena Vista Park in Cambridge. And I'm here tonight to talk on Policy Order 29, which is the ordinance or the order on the temporary moratorium on tree cutting in Cambridge. I'm here not only representing my own views, but those of a group of us who have come together in Cambridge to really start talking on a very instructive level to ourselves, and hopefully a level that will give us some ideas about how to act within our community. We call ourselves the Regenerating Earth's Carbon Sponge Group. In short, we call ourselves the Healthy Soils Group. So what I'm going to spend time tonight reading to you is a letter that we've all put together from that group that really speaks, I think, to Policy Order 29. And then I will leave it here in the basket. I believe we've already submitted it through the email. As Mothers Out Front, Healthy Soils Group, we write to urge you to vote yes on Policy Order 29, which calls for the temporary moratorium on tree cutting in Cambridge. We have read and heard the findings of the city's Urban Forest Master Plan consulting team. We've observed the decline of the tree canopy in our neighborhoods, and we recognize the vital role that trees play in our well-being as human beings and as a city. Trees cool urban heat islands by 10 to 15 degrees, as evidenced in the maps created by the Urban Forest Master Planner. On those maps, red zones indicate the very high levels of heat exposure that people living there will experience. All of this is visible, and it should move us to act. But we should act, too, because of what can't be seen, because it happens in the tree's roots, its trunk, its branches, and in the soil where the trees and plants live. Out of sight, nature is sequestering carbon that's being pulled in from the atmosphere. This is what healthy soil and trees do. And by doing so, nature aids our global efforts to keep the temperature from rising 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what scientists tell us is the tipping point for irreversible and catastrophic consequences. Scientists are revealing the enormous capacity that healthy soil and trees have for storing carbon. Soil health has a symbiotic dependence upon the plants that feed it, and so our call for this moratorium is directly relevant to our group's focus. Older, bigger trees act far more effectively as carbon sponges than do small ones that replace the trees once they're cut down. Protection of our trees is of utmost importance, and we urge Cambridge to move quickly to stem its loss on private and public property and thereby embrace our urban forests. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Susan Ringler, followed by Shane Brody.
Hi, my name is Susan Ringler. I live at 82 Kennard Street. I'm here this evening to speak in favor of Policy Order Number 7, the moratorium on tree cutting. I have submitted written comments, and I have spoken to you before about climate change and many other things. I just want to say also that we need to do something as well about the Acorn Park Drive situation where somebody just comes and wipes out huge trees in the DCR land, and the Apt building is also of concern to me. I want to leave other people time to speak, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Shane Brody, followed by Julia Holderness.
Hi, my name is Shane Brody. I'm a graduate student at Harvard Divinity School. I live in Arlington. I actually locate myself geographically as living near Spy Pond, which is part of the Arlington Land Trust in cooperation with the Massachusetts Audubon Society, and I also live somewhat next to the Alewife Reservation. I was horrified to hear that there was tree cutting at Alewife in the past couple of weeks on private land, but also on public land. Whomever did this then went and painted the stumps a dark brown color to make sure that they looked old and rotten, to basically cover their crime. They knew they were doing something wrong when they did this. And I hope that that's a lesson. I hope that's an alert that we need to be doing something to go after people who do this on public land, because these trees belong to everyone. They belong to themselves, first of all. Their life is their own, and we need to respect that. But also, they are part of our community, and we need to protect them. We need a moratorium on cutting trees on public land as well as private land. I've also been fighting Harvard in a couple of instances, and believe me, it has taken a tremendous toll on me to do this. Because the trees, the landscape, and the community are considered absolutely last in these construction proposals. We need to change that. We need to consider the landscape, the life of trees, the community within the process of development. These are not issues that are separate. We need to change our definition of progress as well. Progress doesn't have to always include our own selfish interests. It has to include everything. We have to start doing something else. And I want to say that I completely support a moratorium on cutting of trees until the Urban Forest Task Force can give us their recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia Holderness, followed by Kathy Susie. No Julia? Okay. Kathy, Susie, are you here? Okay. Stephen Kaiser. And after Stephen, we have Rebecca Ramsey.
Yes, I would like to speak to Policy Order Number 6 and the issue of upzoning. The order is relatively brief, but the implications are complex. We should not expect a detailed treatise on upzoning from the city manager and have it take 5 years to prepare. Seek instead a thoughtful discussion of added taxation for residents who wish to do nothing but preserve their neighborhoods. Consider instead landowners who choose to benefit from upzoning by selling or flipping the land for profit. They deserve special treatment. They take a profit without building anything or contributing any benefit back to the city. Those who engage in flipping of property should pay the entire increase in value of their property back into the city treasury. The issue of fairness in zoning has many moral, fiscal, and legal aspects. It is not necessary to specify all of them in this policy order. It is sufficient to seek a response from the manager on the matter of upzoning so that he can respond in a manner he thinks best. I recommend that any refinement, discussions, or presentations of citywide zoning not be made until the manager responds to this order and until the envisioned plan is completed, reviewed, and formally approved. Zoning comes after planning. I will add only one element to discussion on this policy order, the term profit and its legal relevance to any decision made on upzoning. Article 7 of the Declaration of Rights of the State Constitution provides in effect that government is instituted for the common good and not for the profit or private interest of any one person or group. I read the meaning to be, if upzoning results in profit for a special group within the city, such profit is contrary to the common good and is thus contrary to law. This matter will need an extensive review by the city solicitor and possibly outside counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Can you leave your, do you have a printed copy of your, Stephen? Steve. If you leave those in the basket, then the clerk can include them with the public record. Thank you so much. Next speaker is Rebecca Ramsey, followed by Ellen Mass.
My name is Rebecca Ramsey, and I live in North Cambridge. So I have these comments for the city councilors and Mayor McGovern. Protecting trees in Cambridge is so vital. I hope the City Council can fully support Policy Order Number 7 being considered this evening. A complete moratorium on any further tree removals will enable those responsible for community development planning to establish a process to be followed by private property owners, developers, landscapers, and city departments. As the first step in the overall permit request, the city arborist and staff would conduct an on-site full review of the effect of tree removal on the property itself, plus on the surrounding environment. This could include such aspects as the need for an abundant tree canopy during the summer, providing shade for outdoor activity, indoor coolness, and nesting locations for birds all year round. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen Mass, followed by Carolyn Shipley.
Ellen Mass, 104A Inman Street in Cambridge. President, Friends of Our Wife Reservation. I'm going to read a letter that the former owner of the 55 Wheeler Street wrote with me. This is the Abt building several people have referred to. I'm going to read the letter. It should fit within the time constraints. Knowledgeable professionals are discussing the questionable path chosen by 55 Wheeler Street developers in their December 2017 design plans to remove the property courtyard trees, which were missing from the ongoing special permit requests. The number of actual courtyards is 2. According to Dr. Apt, previous owner, engineer, landscape designer who commissioned the existing underground parking garage, it consists of a 4-foot thick foundation and heated ramp. It would be extremely costly and unnecessary to remove it. As an example of the missing courtyard trees, the mature birch grove that exists was planted in '69 by Dr. Apt and notes the tree caliper is up to 15 inches and very beautiful. MIT architect of the main building, which stands over the underground foundation, was the architect was Professor Imre Halaz. Builder George Macumber built the underground garage foundation on the art building. In 1999, Clark Apt applied, no, I'm going to leave that out. The Thoreau Society Incorporated of Concord, 915 Walden Street, directed its attention to the Northwest Cambridge address and selected the building and 2 internal courtyards for 2 esteemed awards. Earlier in '79, a society plaque was given and is available on the walls at the present Apt Associates located at 10 Fawcett Street. In conclusion, the new owners failed to preserve large, diverse native canopy that existed within the building's courtyards and failed to utilize the existing and operational underground parking foundation for tenant parking and for needed future apartment buildings. We asked the council, and we'll refer this to the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, to withhold further permits and review the new owner's special permits to protect these highly valued amenities for our city and for adjacent residents and businesses and for the benefit of future tenants who will live in the 55 Wheeler Street building. All comments and questions to Clark are welcome, and I have his telephone number. Clark C. Apt, Chairman Emeritus, Founding CEO of Apt Associates. Ellen Mass, President, Friends of Our Wife Reservation. And thank you for listening and for seeing the catastrophic.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Carolyn Shipley, followed by Flory Westcott.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm speaking on the POR 2019, number 29. I strongly support the moratorium on tree cutting as written in POR 2019, number 29. It is encouraging that the amendment has been proposed. I notice that some goals and strategies in the executive summary of Envision Cambridge provide strength to how the city views the importance of trees. However, I also agree with the suggestions made by Carol O'Hare today to make the language more precise. For example, as Carol O'Hare pointed out in an email today, the use of the word permit is vague, since there are a number of types of permits referenced in the document. She recommended changing the wording to tree removal permit, which I second and strongly recommend. I further agree with Carol O'Hare's suggestion about publicizing the intent of the ordinance. She wrote that reporting requirements and any moratorium should be widely publicized to all segments of the population of Cambridge. So I note that the executive summary of Envision Cambridge proposes that city communicate to the public the city's climate and environment initiatives and the environmental impact of policy decisions. So to me, any policy on ensuring the health of our urban forests is assumed to be a city climate and environment initiative, as stated in the EC. Another strategy in the executive summary proposes that the city work with the entire Cambridge community to strengthen the city's climate and environment initiatives. Since the city published these strategies in the Envision document, the city should seriously consider the suggestions made by Carol O'Hare. If only this moratorium could apply to permits already granted that were granted during the 2 years that the EC was in process. I include here for you, and it was in the email to you today, some reasons why trees are very important to us, some that are not very popularly known. A lot of people think that, is that it?
You have another 12 seconds.
I'm sorry.
9 seconds. You're in the countdown. But
A lot of people think that trees can provide a carbon sink. The only really effective carbon sink is in forests.
Okay.
What our trees do provide is they do mitigate the
Carolyn,
urban
if you could finish
heat
up.
index.
And if you have those comments in writing, you're welcome to leave them in the basket, and then they'll go onto the record and they'll be printed. Okay,
I
I
have
think
this for you if you like.
You can put them just in the basket right there. Thank you. Okay, next up is Flory Westcott, followed by Maggie Booz.
Flory Westcott, 33 Market Street. The idea that trees are a connecting force between all types of life, microbes, insects, birds, and mammals, was presented at a talk at the Public Library by Uli Larimer, a plant curator at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. That trees are a force should be kept in mind. We depend upon trees for life, and in this densely built city, they depend upon us for protection and care. Climate change is one of the greatest dangers we face in the near future, and protecting our tree canopy is one of the most immediate and cost-effective ways to begin to protect our city from that threat. I want to read a letter from the Committee on Public Planting. Dear Mayor McGovern and City Councilors, the Committee on Public Planting is made up of 13 volunteers who meet monthly to work with the Department of Urban Forestry to promote and enhance Cambridge's tree canopy. The beauty of the urban canopy and its indispensable contribution to the environment inspires us in this work. We are concerned and troubled by the documented rapid diminishment of our urban forest and feel that the city must be aggressively proactive to protect, nurture, and value our trees. We are writing in support of a temporary moratorium on tree cutting until the Tree Task Force and Urban Forest Master Planning process is completed and recommendations are made. We feel that it is essential to stem the loss of trees while this work is ongoing. We appreciate the city's commitment to the urban forest and to the master planning process and urge you to vote in support of the moratorium. Sincerely yours, Committee on Public Planting, with the names of the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maggie Booz, followed by Louise Weed.
Good evening. I'm Maggie Bowes. Flory and I are the co-chairs of the Committee on Public Planting, and our committee put together the letter that Flory read. We're very much in favor. We also both sit on the Tree Task Force, a force that was formed by the city in order to study our diminishing tree canopy. And we've been introduced to some really shocking news over the course of the past 4 to 5 months of sitting on that task force and meeting with that group as well monthly, which is a group that's comprised of a wide variety of people in Cambridge who have interests in trees and in landscape. We are addressed monthly by representatives from Reed Hildebrand, which is a landscape architecture firm that the city hired at great expense to study our urban forest, put together an urban forest master plan, and introduce and do the kind of research that we've been introduced to. And the shocking news is this great diminishment of our tree canopy, and the fact that at the rate we're going of planting approximately 600 trees a year, and with an optimistic mortality rate in trees of about 4 to 6%, which I don't even think is actually what is happening. We can't possibly keep up with the with maintaining a tree canopy the size that it is now. I mean, not even close. We're not even close. We're about 25% of what we need to be in terms of tree planting. In other words, we need to plant, just to maintain our tree canopy as it is now in its diminished state, 2,500 trees a year. The best way we can go about to preserve trees is to preserve trees. And a moratorium, while the task force does its work and while Rita Hildebrand does its research and we come up with ordinance ideas for the city of Cambridge to adopt, is a really, really vital idea. I personally would like to see trees treated as infrastructure and not as a second thought. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Louise Weed, followed by Suzanne Blier. I guess Louise isn't here, so Suzanne, come on up.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to several issues before the council tonight. Order number 1 on flooding protocols. I strongly encourage this, and at the same time to encourage that we look at the sometimes 19th century outdated plumbing and other systems before going forward with making major new development projects. Order number 6 on the added value in upzonings. I strongly support this, in part as somebody who was not able to get through a zoning petition last year because Harvard Square individuals felt that it was not conducive to have affordable housing on the upper stories. This is something, if we address the upzoning value, then in fact we could assure that the upper stories of buildings in places such as Harvard Square could have affordable housing built into them. On order number 7 and the tree cutting, I strongly support this. Even in the Dukakis Park with new trees dying at nearly 90%, it is really a critical issue. I support Carol O'Hare's statements, and as a property owner, to my mind, it would be perfectly fine to get permission to cut a tree before it is done, and I think a 1-year moratorium is apt. Committee report number 1, I think, is a very strong statement with some things that could be nudged in it. This has to do with envision and urban form. Form and planning must come before zoning. The first item there is protection of historic and conservation districts, and there are a series of other things that I outlined in my letter to you. But as part of this planning, there are also some things that need to be tweaked and focused on early on as top priorities, such as green spaces and routes between open spaces and specific neighborhood criteria. Also, let me reiterate the problems with things such as of right housing changes, because we don't want to remove the power of citizens in this important city, and we must reinforce the primacy of community feedback at every single stage. And finally, on community report number 2 on the affordable housing overlay, let me just say again that this is developer driven and we cannot remove the voice of citizens here. And there are many other ways to get affordable housing through zoning, whether it is thinking about adding more individuals within a single residence unit, or addressing the issue of single family requirements, or even providing city funds to support ADUs. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Harris, followed by Judy Johnson.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Harris. I live at 9 Marie Avenue, and I'm commenting regarding policy order number 29. I work at the Tufts University Global Development and Environment Institute, where we have an ongoing research project on forests and biomass, and I think some of the findings are relevant to efforts to preserve the urban tree canopy in Cambridge. The primary conclusion from our studies concerns the extraordinary value of mature trees. Many people believe that when mature trees are cut, the damage can be compensated for by replanting. After all, aren't trees a renewable resource? The truth is not so simple. For example, consider a project that removes a large 50-year-old tree approximately 18 inches in diameter and 45 feet high, and replaces it by planting a smaller tree or trees that are approximately 4 inches in diameter and 10 to 12 feet high. Often replantings are smaller than that. If the currently standing tree is about 4 times the size of one of the proposed new trees in both radius and height, it would contain about 64 times as much biomass as the smaller tree and would store about 16 times as much carbon annually. Thus, to replace the lost biomass would require 64 new trees for each tree cut. Even to replace the annual carbon storage capacity would require 16 new trees per tree cut. These figures are clearly unrealistic for any of the tree cutting going on in the city today. The damage done by cutting mature trees will therefore be long-lasting. It will take decades to replace the carbon storage capacity and canopy area of lost trees, even if the new plantings survive in a city environment. We tend to take for granted the trees that we see as we walk the streets of Cambridge, but these trees are a unique resource, the legacy of many decades of annual growth. It would not be quite accurate to refer to them as an irreplaceable resource, but they are replaceable only on a time scale of decades to generations. In the meantime, tree cutting results in a carbon pulse to the atmosphere at a time when we can least afford it. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the next few decades are critical to mitigating irreversible climate change. Also, in terms of climate adaptation, it's true that the next few decades will be a time when we have increasing need of tree canopy to mitigate urban heat island effects. Planting new trees is an excellent endeavor, and the more of this can be done as a long-term investment, the better. But it does not compensate for the destruction of existing trees. So I strongly support strengthening the tree protection ordinance to take account of this important fact and to minimize further losses of mature trees. This principle should be applied for trees both on public and private property throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you. And please leave your written comments so that we can get them accurate on the record. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Judy Johnson, followed by Sue Butler. And if anyone is standing and doesn't want to stand, you can go up into the balcony. There's more seating up above. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Judy Johnson, 55 Antrim Street in Cambridge, supporting policy order number 7 for the immediate moratorium on tree cutting. I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, this is really not complicated. You either want trees or you don't want trees. So I expect everyone will be voting yes. And please pass another policy order to protect trees on Wheeler, such as on Wheeler Street, from developers who get special permits. Oh, and on my way to the council tonight, there was a man down in Central Square, and he was cutting down a tree. And I watched as people started gathering, and they were yelling at him to stop. And then a police car came up, and the police got out, and they arrested him. And they put him in handcuffs, and they threw him in the back of a car. And I guess there's a law in Cambridge about cutting public trees. Is really quite dramatic. But I was confused because recently I saw in the paper that a developer had cut 11 public trees at Alewife. And even though the city knows about this and they know who the developer is, he hasn't been arrested and he hasn't been charged with a crime. And yet this man was arrested, and next week his name will be in the paper and he'll be shamed. And yet this developer cut 11 public trees and the city's not doing anything. So my question is that how Cambridge, I mean, I think it's completely unfair. I think this guy down in Central Square should be let go. I mean, if you're not going to arrest the developer, then he was just, and the tree was small. It was like very small, and it probably wasn't going to survive anyhow because no one was watering it. So, let this guy go. I mean, if the developer doesn't have to pay for it, why should this guy have to pay for it? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sue Butler, followed by Jack Wofford.
Good evening, City Council. I'm Sue Butler. I live at 14 Clinton Street. I support Policy Order 7 And I thank all the people and all the committees who so thoughtfully worked so hard on trying to protect trees. It's of urgent importance that we protect our trees and declare the moratorium on tree cutting right now. My first piece of paper for you is from the Military Advisory Board talking about climate change and how urgent and complex it is on a national and international level. My second handout is an 800-word essay that I've written on the complexity and the seriousness of the problem. I'm going to just read it. I've left minutes on the table before, and I hope I can just go straight through it and finish this essay. I'm a nurse. I have 5 years of ICU experience at NYU Medical Center, BU Medical Center, and Mass General Hospital. I have 35 years of work in community mental health, which is taking care of the poorest, sickest people in the system. The title of this essay is Earth is a Person. In the surgical oncology unit, the cancer ward, you can't always save people. Sometimes all you can do is keep them comfortable, be there with them, then care for their families as they go. You see the many ways that each person dies. You see the young woman with breast cancer stay alive to see her daughter graduate from high school or get married. You see the angry person go full of tension and knots of rage. You're surprised that someone didn't make it through the night when that person seemed so well the night before. Each death is unique. Each death is unpredictable. Each death tells the story of the life that has gone before. Was it full of life, love, tyranny, isolation, fullness, humor, and joy? The final catastrophe that ends a person's life is never predictable in every detail, but it is reflective of everything that has gone before. So it is with each ecosystem we see in failure. Some are dying of poisons dumped on them. People are ill from the polluted water that is also poisoning the plants and the animals. In the cities, heat zaps suddenly kill the trees. Young trees, their leaves turn brown at the edges and then entirely, and then the tree is completely gone. Just a trunk, no sap, soon to be cut down and replaced with another tree that will fail. Coral reefs blanched, failing from so many distant causes, from ocean acidification to sunblock chemicals that do not biodegrade and poison the coral. Who would have guessed that such a distant cause could bring this about? He seemed so good last night. What happened? We can skate along for quite a while, and then the collapse comes and comes quickly, irreversibly. Consider the corpus of this complex system. The geology of our bones, the acid-base balance of our fluids, the failures of our circulations, the pulmonary failures, the dehydration, the fever. As our Earth is mined with vast volumes of solids, liquids, and gases removed from its structure, earthquakes and volcanoes destroy. Please call the orthopedic consult.
Are you almost finished, Sue?
Almost.
I hate to cut you off on this beautiful essay, but it is over the time. And you can leave it for us in the basket.
I will wrap it up, which is the interconnectedness is central to the fragility. If the kidneys fails, if the ocean absorbs to the max, acidification cannot be flushed anywhere, we fail. If the trees can no longer respire, they cannot remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Acidosis worsens, fever and heat zaps kill more trees, desiccate them. Shade, water cycle, and CO2 absorption are lost. If the jet stream is
there are
stopped
other
and ocean
speakers.
currents...
There are other speakers waiting.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
will leave you a copy.
Please leave it for us, and it will be part of the record, and everybody can read it. Thank you.
My message is very simple. Protect your trees.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next, we have Jack Wofford, followed by Marilee Meyer.
Good evening. My name is Jack Wofford. I live at 13 Cottage Street in Cambridgeport. I've been part of a small group, including Kathy Zusi and Peter Kleinfelter, who've been working with Henrietta Davis in her role as community representative on the task force concerning I-90, the Turnpike, the Alston interchange, the billion-dollar project across the river. I am here to support Policy Order Number 2, which congratulates Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollock, for her decision to elevate Soldiers Field Road rather than the Turnpike as a way to provide sufficient space for parkland and pathway. The policy order not only congratulates the Secretary, but reminds her of Cambridge issues that are at stake, and in particular, the need to mitigate noise from its current unacceptable levels, to design the project in a way that provides the best visual appearance from Cambridge. From Magazine Beach Park, we see the Turnpike in a very vivid way, so that's important. That the pathways on the Cambridge side of the river also be improved to take into account the increased use that will come of those during the construction of the Paul Dudley White Pathway, the Turnpike, and Soldiers Field Road on the other side of the river. That the Secretary carry through on a commitment to look carefully at mitigating the traffic impacts on what's called the box, Memorial Drive, Soldiers Field Road, Western Avenue, River Street, Putnam Avenue, and that with respect to all of the above items, the Secretary developed those features with maximum collaboration with the City of Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Mayor Davis. If you can leave us those comments if you like.
Your resolution. So
oh.
Comments were in my.
Oh. Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you then. Let's see. Next we have Marilee Meyer, followed by Carol O'Hare.
I noticed Kathy Zuzzi here who calling earlier. Do you want to?
I know. I see Kathy, and I also see, a couple of others who we skipped, and we'll come back to them.
All right. Just offering, giving me more time. Hi, Marilee Meyer, 10 Dana Street, and I too support the moratorium on trees, number 7, but I would also like the council to support PO number 6, asking city departments to analyze the development impact on systems and infrastructure and ask developers to contribute more of their considerable financial gain to the city. The citywide need for housing and jobs rings rather hollow without considering mitigation, traffic, schools, setback, transportation, and vulnerable infrastructure and tree loss. The consequences of such a density needs to be studied, and any added value to large properties can fund affordable housing elsewhere by helping to purchase traditional housing and convert older buildings, which could also offset the 130% increased benefits given developers for potential inclusionary housing. Possible result? Shorter height and setbacks in vulnerable places. I also want to support the urban form recommendations. CDD would have gotten further presenting the long-term plan report rather than the steady diet of housing overlay, which is not 100% affordable, but proportional and developer-driven. Unfortunately, contradictory details between the recommendations and overlay need reconciliation and further regulation. Urban draft goals do acknowledge existing development patterns, context, neighborhood transitions, preservation, and complementary infill, environment, and community feedback. We cannot afford to streamline the zoning process in favor of as-of-right development. Design quality should be district by district, not city-wide. Residential banks, buildings now look like banks, institutions, or light industry. Closing the envision process is akin to standing on the deck and declaring mission accomplished. It is not by a long shot. And we need to keep the dialogue active toward a mutual plan. And residents and green roof decks do not make up for public access to open space, and not all corridors, including Mass Ave between Central and Harvard Square, are appropriate for 12-story buildings either. So I really encourage more dialogue on the envisioned details. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol O'Hare, followed by David Davis.
I'm swapping with Kathy because she needs to leave. So I'll go at the end.
That's okay.
And I'll be
Hi, Kathy.
short because Jack did a fabulous job. I'm Kathy Zusi, 202 Hamilton Street, and I'm here to...
No, keep the green, the button, yeah.
There. To support policy order number 2, which defends Cambridge's interests with I-90. I thought Jack made a wonderful summary. 2 little bits we're also asking for, or you're asking for, thank you, access to Cambridge, because that's a great concern. We want MassDOT thinking about the right-hand turn lane onto River Street so that people can get off of Soldiers Field Road. That's absolutely critical and imperative to economic development, access to Kendall Square. Furthermore, this is a project that's going to go on over 8 to 10 years, and they have to really thoughtfully think of alternative transportation, both public transportation and pathways for pedestrians and cyclists. So please support Cambridge's interests with policy number 2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I guess we'll go back to Carol, or Carol, are you not speaking? Okay, and then we'll get to you, Dave.
Good evening. Thank you. First, on tree protection, policy order 7, I, as you know from Carolyn Shipley, sent you 3 editorial corrections that should be made. I also stressed the fact that if you don't publicize this widely and over with every single department, it is going to be a nothing, the moratorium, because trees will be chopped. Because people are ignorant of it, not because they intend to evade the moratorium. And I also wonder if there's some way to put a greater disincentive in there, although that might be difficult at this point. On the I-90 policy order 2, I applaud Kathy and Jack and Henrietta for all their efforts. I've been kind of a canary on this for many years, and until they got involved and organized the neighborhood, Cambridge was an afterthought. So I urge you to keep the pressure on the secretary, who made a wonderful decision for Cambridge's benefit recently, but much more has to be done on that. On urban forum, committee report number 1, I second everything Steve Kaiser said about everything he talked about. On, on policy order 1 about cities' communication and protocols responding to flooding, it was disheartening and shocking to see the residents impacted by the Craigie Street water main break, who had to appear 2 weeks in a row before the city even contacted them, and I don't even know whether they've been contacted yet. I understand liability issues, but that is no reason for being Trumpian. And the city should be embarrassed at the least about that. Application number 4, increasing the hotel FAR in Industry B zone. What and who is this bare bones submission for? The zone is near the MXD zone. There's no explanation of it, and I think you would want to know more about it. And on 831, City Manager number 16, does everyone realize that this item involves the ISD building and the parcel behind? And I wonder whether zoning is compliant for office in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary McGovern is here, and I think Dave Davis is our next speaker.
Good evening. David Davis, supporting policy order number 7. I do have a great regret. That is, I don't have anything original to say. I have nothing original to say because you've heard it all before. But I want to reiterate a few things. And I want, first and foremost, to thank the City Council for hearing me and for my efforts to cheer you on to take on a difficult task. It's a very difficult task to protect the tree canopy in this city because there's a record of so many efforts that have failed. And so it would be ever so great if you could continue with the momentum that seems to be building now with the task force and with this kind of policy order, that this is a time for real change. When I say I have nothing original to say, I like to tell you that what has motivated me recently most has been this newspaper that was sent out by the Association of Cambridge Neighborhoods. This has sat on my desk and I've read it several times through. It's not only descriptive of a very sad story for the canopy, but it's also prescriptive, showing what we can do as individuals to protect and preserve our trees. And I'd like to add this to the record if it hasn't already been added to the record, and if there are any city councilors that haven't seen it, I'd be interested in trying to encourage that they do. The second thing that I want to speak to is Title 8 of the Cambridge Municipal Code, Health and Safety. Now, I am preaching to the choir, and I hope you'll allow me to apologize for that. But under Title 8 of Health and Safety of the Code of Ordinances, there is the Tree Protection Ordinance, and it has a statement of purpose. And this comes from the year 2004. And it says, the City Council hereby finds that the preservation of existing trees and the promotion of new tree planting is a public purpose that protects the public health, welfare, environment, and aesthetics of the City of Cambridge and its citizens. The urban forest serves a wide variety of functions which promote the health, safety, and welfare of residents. These functions include, and it goes through a list of conserving energy, improving local and global air quality, reducing wind speed and directing airflow, reducing noise pollution, providing habitat for birds and other wildlife, reducing storm runoff, increasing real estate values, and enhancing visual and aesthetic qualities. This is your statement. This is your guiding principles. And I hesitate to remind you of them, but these are beautifully stated and totally opportune. Something I have not heard mentioned is that when we begin to get heat waves, the heat waves are going to kill Cambridge citizens. They do every year. There's a certain number who, in fact, die as a result of a heat wave. Every change in temperature of 1 degree has an effect on lives in the city. The canopy can increase
Mr. Davis.
the protection of the canopy.
Thank you. If you have your comments in written form, you can leave them in the basket. Thank you. Sharon DeVos? There she is. Followed by Lee Farris.
Good evening. My name is Sharon DeVos. I live at 118 Antrim Street. So we know now that Cambridge has lost 18% of our tree canopy since 2009, with a net loss of over 30 acres of canopy cover every year. And now only 25% of our land area is covered by a tree canopy. And if we continue on this path, our canopy cover will be 16.2% of what we currently have in 2030. Cambridge tree canopy was very different when I arrived here about 40 years ago. And it was very different when my children in the early 90s were babies. It was very leafy in the early 90s on Antrim Street, where I live. It was shaded by many large old trees. My neighbors who grew up on Antrim Street in the 50s and 60s told me of how they could walk down the street in pouring rain and not get wet. That is not the case today. Most of the older trees on Antrim Street that are more than 50 years old are now gone. And in spite of my neighbor's best efforts, because most of us are tree lovers, the canopy is shrinking. So it is so important to preserve the older trees we have now and not depend on planting replacement trees. We just can't do that. Now that we know how much canopy Cambridge has lost in the past decade, we have to act to preserve our precious trees. Trees should not be cut down unless there is proof that there is no alternative. We owe it to the children who live in Cambridge now and in the future to preserve our mature trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Ferris? No? Javon Sobrino Wheeler. Switched.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Jeevan Sobrino Wheeler. I live at 19 Trowbridge Street. If I had two public comments tonight, one would be in support of the tree cutting moratorium. We've lost trees at an alarming rate in Cambridge, and I work with land conservation programs, so I understand how important trees are in an urban area like Cambridge. Because I have only one comment, I'm here to speak this evening in favor of public financing for municipal elections, which is the subject of Policy Order Number 30, which has got a little less attention tonight. Public financing is a way to encourage candidates who wouldn't typically enter the race for city council or school committee to run. As I'm sure all the city councilors in this room are well aware, candidates who run for local office in Cambridge often need to raise tens of thousands of dollars to be taken seriously. Many Cambridge residents who would make great city councilors or school committee members never even consider running because they don't know how they could raise that kind of money. A candidate's success is often directly related to their ability to fundraise, which is tied to how many people they know who can write $1,000 checks. This is one of the main reasons that our elected bodies have traditionally had fewer people of color, fewer women, and fewer working class Canterbridgians in the city as a whole. Public financing for municipal elections could help change that and level the playing field for candidates who don't have the ability to raise $50,000 to $100,000 per election cycle on their own. It could do this by providing grants to candidates who raise money from a certain number of donors in Cambridge and by offering matching contributions for small donations. Public financing could also reduce the impact of special interests by requiring that candidates who wish to receive public financing not take contributions above a certain amount. That said, there are some issues with the Public Financing Order number 122 that was passed last year. For example, this policy order would limit city council candidates to $35,000 per election cycle for school committee and $25,000 for city council, or vice versa. That may sound like a lot of money, but I believe $35,000 is about 50% less than most of the current city councilors raised in the last election cycle. And this restriction means that this public financing system wouldn't help non-traditional candidates enough for them to win, and also wouldn't be attractive enough for traditional candidates to forego big checks and opt for public financing. We need a public financing system, but we need to do it right. However, there are models of public financing that would work. I'd encourage the City Council to look at New Haven's public financing model from New Haven, Connecticut. The Democracy Fund is one example. In exchange for foregoing contributions above $370 and getting at least 200 donations from city residents, candidates in New Haven are eligible for a public financing grant of $19,000 and matching contributions for small donations. Cambridge has been a leader in voting reform since we adopted ranked choice voting in 1939. It's time we became a leader in public financing of elections as well. Public finance is incredibly important, and if we are serious about encouraging every Cambridge resident everyday Cambridge residents to run for office and get big money out of politics, we have to adopt public financing. I hope we can do it in 2019. Thank you.
Denise Gilson, followed by Charles Franklin.
Good evening. Denise Jolson, 2203 Mass Avenue. I'm here to speak about policy order number 7. So as a member of the task force, I believe that this policy order puts undue pressure on the task force. We have not yet completed our work, and in fact, we're meeting this Thursday night, and I encourage people to come and attend the meeting. The interesting thing about the task force is that we have been meeting over the past several months, and the city has hired the most incredibly informed and, I think, productive consultants at a cost that I can't even imagine. I'm sure it's thousands and thousands of dollars. They're professional. They are extremely knowledgeable, and I've learned so much from them, and I think that we need to complete our work before we add anything to the mix. This order places a significant burden on property owners as well as city departments. We should allow more time to consider this action. It's not fully vetted, it has not been sufficiently discussed, and it should be sent back to the committee for further consideration. I just want to share my personal story about trees. So a couple of years ago, I had a tree in my yard at 2203 Mass Ave that came down. It was diseased, and I had to replace it. And we wanted to replace it with a tree that was not just a little sapling, but a fairly significant tree. And we did so, but we had to give up other things. And we willingly gave up other things because the tree was important to us, and the shade and the aesthetic for the yard and the environment and all of that. Last year, we lost 5 more trees. I have 5 dead trees in my yard, and they have to be taken down. And they have to be replaced because I want them to be replaced. It's important. But I have to tell you, I got a quote from several different tree companies, and the lowest quote was $21,000 to replace the 5 trees. So we're putting it off. In the meantime, every single time the wind blows, we worry about those trees coming down on the cars next door, on the property next door, on our fence, out into the middle of the street. It's a problem. I don't think there's a person in this region that wouldn't agree that climate change is real, that protecting the canopy is necessary, but we have to do it in a way that makes sense for everybody. We just can't be adding regulation upon regulation, particularly when the city had the foresight to put together a task force that is now currently working. So I would hope that you would allow the task force to continue its work. It'll take another 2 to 3 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Charles Franklin, followed by Patrick Barrett.
Hello, Charles Franklin, 162 Hampshire Street. All right, I've got a couple of things to say. I support the looking for alternatives for water bottles for our schools. For most cases, I think water bottles are a scam. They just take filtered water and put it in a bottle. You can get that from the sink. It's no reason to pay for that. 2, I do not support the ban or limitation on campaign donations from outside of the state. I don't think that people should not be able to receive donations from family members or previous residents who have moved out of town. Instead, we should adopt donation limits, or perhaps just banning all corporations from donating. I think that should be illegal federally. It's not. Last, I support the tree regulation, and I have a prepared comment. Trees are important for the environment, for safety in terms of traffic calming, and for quality of life. They may seem like the things that just drop leaves on your property or get in the way of your project, but when the city is hot and the air is filled with smog, people will wonder what happened, and I'll have to bite my tongue because no one likes to hear "and I told you so." Thank you.
Patrick Barrett, followed by Peter Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Patrick Barrett. I filed the petition that is before you on behalf of my clients in the Industry B zone, and I'm happy to go through that in great detail in ordinance as well as in the planning board. I'd like to speak on a couple of other issues as well. The policy order regarding the valuations of zoning, I think that's a very important thing to discuss, and I think it's relative to the petition I filed as well. We have some significant issues and disparities between large development in the city and smaller scale urban fill. A petition that I filed and passed 2 years ago in Central Square is exemplary of this, where I had been told for many years that only large development could exist in Central Square and only large development would be supported in Central Square, which turned out to not really be the truth. We passed the zoning, we have multiple projects on the way, and this petition that I filed on behalf of my client again is related to that issue as well. Hotel use, I'm building a hotel in Central Square, as you know. We have a large demand for this use. We have very few places that are building them for lots of different reasons. Industry B is actually probably one of the best areas to put one because largely, as Carol had put it, it's MXD. Relative to the tree canopy issue, in general, I actually support a moratorium on taking trees down. However, I think it's a strange tug of war that we have in the city, where we have commissions and we have consultants and we spend a great deal of money on planning, and then, sort of halfway through it, we get the fidgets and start wanting to do faster changes. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think in large part, none of us here are climate change deniers, and all of us here seem to love the urban canopy of trees. I don't think anyone denies that. As my friend Carol O'Hara would say, the devil's in the details. Thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to talking to you at the Ordinance and Planning Board. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Kirby, followed by Adam Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Peter Kirby. I live at 128 Oxford Street in Agassiz neighborhood. I came here to speak about the tree ordinance and request that there be a moratorium on tree cutting until the commission is finished its work and something is put in place. One example of a reason for that is in my backyard, actually on my neighbor's property, is a large old oak tree. Very tall, very old, and it regularly drops small branches, and we've had to have it trimmed a few times just to take care of some of the dangerous parts. The house next door that it sits on the property of was sold last year, and the new owners, as they were contemplating purchasing it, mentioned how they wanted to take the tree down. Because they had had a similar tree fall in their mother's house, and they were, wary of it. When I first heard that, I thought, well, that would be a shame. But on the other hand, particularly this fall, it just rained acorns, including denting my car in the driveway. And so I thought, maybe that's not so bad, and it might have to happen. On the other hand, I recently read the newspaper that was sent out, the tree issue, and realized, there are a microcosm of small cases like, my neighbors and mine, where you might say, you might lean towards taking a tree down. And yet, if you get the big picture, you realize that no, maybe we can cut off a few limbs, maybe we can trim it back a little bit, but protect the tree. And I'm particularly concerned because as more and more people get aware of the Tree Commission's activity and the planned ordinances, that it sounds like certain people are rushing and chopping down trees willy-nilly to get in ahead of any possible regulation or constraint thereof. And this is, once those trees are down, they're down, and they're not going to be replaced very easily. As a friend of mine has on his email, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Unfortunately, when those trees come down, we can't go back 20 years and plant replacements. So the best thing to do is actually protect those trees today and not have them cut down at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Gould, followed by Sylvia Parsons.
Hi, I'm Adam Gould of 35 Rice Street. I'm in opposition of application 2 and 3. I just don't think we need bright signage everywhere in Cambridge, especially for like big banks. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia Parsons, followed by Charles Teague.
I'm Sylvia Parsons. I live at 22 Hancock Street. I'm here to speak in favor of the tree moratorium. You have heard many more eloquent and more expert people than I this evening. I think Peter Kirby just now in particular made some very good points. Cutting down a mature tree is making a large change in Cambridge before the Tree Task Force has had a time to come to its conclusions. It's making a change that, as we've heard, can't be reversed by planting additional trees. I would point out that not only have we heard that many, many new trees would need to be planted to replace the carbon sequestration potential and the shade of an old tree, but you're not just cutting down one organism. You're cutting down a habitat for birds, a habitat for mammals, a habitat for insects. Our ecosystem is suffering from an enormous loss of insect life, whose implications we don't wholly know. You're cutting down mosses, you're cutting down lichens, you're cutting down fungi. We've reached the point where the reflection that our economy depends on a larger ecosystem is no longer some beautiful spiritual thought, but a bleak and urgent reality. And I urge us to pause before we make large changes in that reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Charles Teague, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Charles Teague, 23 Edmund Street. Of course, I support a moratorium, and it's because every day, even on weekends, we're being set back. So this past Saturday, I saw the Cambridge Landscaping Tree Removal Caravan enter North Cambridge on Ringe Ave at 7 in the morning. You can't even start work legally till 9 in the morning. The Saturday before, I was called, people call me, to witness the illegal tree cutting on Acorn Park Drive, and it was done by a multi-billion-dollar corporation cutting down public trees and then even trimming city trees. So I just ask you, do the right thing, and let's stop the stupidity. Thank you.
Heather Hoffman, followed by John Pitkin.
Hello, Heather Hoffman. First off, I want to say I could not say it better than Adam Gould did. We're turning into this multicolored splash of ego. And also, please do stop the plastic water bottles. The water generally tastes yucky because of the plastic, and we don't need all of those bottles. And of course, I'm in favor of the tree moratorium. I went out with Mr. Teague and Representative Rogers to take a look, and I had all of the records from the Registry of Deeds so that we could make sure that this was actually the Alewife Reservation where these trees were. It was. I am happy to share all of my information with the city in case anybody doesn't believe that those were our trees. And I hope that people won't just say, darn, it happened again. If we don't do anything, you know, I once said in this chamber, if you never say no, they won't know that you can. And that's what's happening with our trees and with our quality of life in this city. We keep giving in to development. We keep not caring enough to say it's time to stop. And that leads me to upzoning. I really wish that someone had proposed this a long time ago. I will recall an upzoning in the MXD district that was desperately, desperately needed. 300,000 square feet of new commercial development for the Broad Institute, which turned out to be 250,000 square feet for the Broad and 50,000 for Google, which got rid of a bunch of trees on top of the Kendall Square garage. And you know what benefit the city got out of this? As I put it then, the value of my house plus a crappy condo in a bad part of town. That's what we've got for 300,000 square feet of lab space in Kendall Square. Why are we doing this to ourselves? We are smarter than this, and we ought to care more. We're killing ourselves off. We got Boston Properties to care about trees. How about the city council joins them? Thank you.
John Pitkin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John Pitkin, 18 Fayette Street. John Pitkin, 18 Fayette Street. Speaking about the tree canopy preservation, in favor of the moratorium. The tree canopy is part of the support system for life itself. And I just want to read a couple of sentences from a letter that my neighbor Francis Donovan sent to the council, which has not arrived in time for tonight, but I just think it's worth, I'd like to enter those into the record. This is one that cannot be kicked down the road. Failure to act tonight will permit damage from which Cambridge may never recover. Tonight you are asked to take strong action to stop the reckless cutting of trees before it's too late. Many of you have already expressed full support for this. It's time now to make council backing unanimous for at least a temporary moratorium on tree cutting until firmer controls be drafted and passed, and for implementation of the strongest possible program of Cambridge tree canopy protection, recovery, and expansion to guarantee our city and the planet the benefits these amazing plants provide. I would now add, this is speaking just for myself, these are my words. I think that moratorium is a kind of shock therapy. We need it. This is an emergency situation. I don't think there's any doubt that we've already learned that from the results of the trees task force studies. And I agree with this idea that if there's a moratorium, that education and outreach by the city and all its departments are needed as urgently as the moratorium itself to communicate the reasons for the moratorium and the importance of preserving and replacing trees. I hope that if the council does pass a moratorium, that this will put some pressure on the task force and really backing to Tree Task Force to think bigger and more comprehensively about its recommendations. They might, for example, propose something along the lines of a Green New Deal for our Cambridge tree canopy to engage the next generations in building the skills and take on the task of carrying out the decades-long labors of maintaining and cultivating the tree canopy. This is as important as stopping the cutting if we're going to rebuild it. This would give them hope for the future and the stake they deserve in building that future. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to some folks who were skipped to see if they are here. Julia Holderness.
Okay, hi. Just one quick thing. As a mother of two tree climbing children, I happily also support the measure to protect the tree canopy. But I'm here to talk about something else. So first off, I'm Julia Holderness. I live at 130 Brattle Street. And I'm here to talk about the water infrastructure issue, related flooding, and the city's response to these issues. My neighbors and I have spoken here already about how on December 23, a corroded water main unleashed a flood that ravaged our homes and cars. Here in brief is an initial estimate of our loss due to that event. 8 basements, 7 of them finished, plus their contents, including furnaces, water heaters, washers and dryers, computer servers, artwork, furniture, personal mementos, and family heirlooms, all destroyed. 6 cars, all destroyed. The current projected cost for flood mitigation, reconstruction, and replacement of destroyed contents, it comes to $1.1 million. This is based on my questioning of my neighbors, so chew on that. The only good news is that given the timing of the eruption, nobody was physically hurt, and obviously that is the most important news. Now for a different story, over the past month, that was December 23 of 2018, so over the past month, my neighbors, my family, and I have pulled up our socks, cleaned up our homes as best we could, and begun planning our reconstruction. Anyone who knows, who's done a renovation knows that that's a headache under the best of circumstances. For at least half of us, it's been complicated by the fact that our insurance has denied our claims for compensation. We all have similar insurance policies, but some insurance companies interpret this as entirely a city matter and none of their responsibility. We cannot move forward until we have guaranteed coverage to do so. My garden is an eyesore, and I see pictures of it floating around now on the internet, and they're not the flattering pictures. I have to warn fellow parents to prepare their kids before they come over so that they don't freak out at the sight of an apparent hurricane. My children cannot play in their own front yard. 2 neighbors who are in their 80s, one of whom who has spoken here several times already, have been stuck in a hotel room for the past month. According to one of them, and I quote her, "The bigger loss has been in our time and ability to proceed with our lives in a normal fashion. Living in a hotel all these weeks away from our important papers and computer has been extremely stressful. We've all, and now me, we've all lost sleep, time, and patience over this matter." So, just very quickly, all of this is because of failing infrastructure and a lack of oversight. Although the water mains were inspected and declared to be in excellent shape back in December, the catastrophe on December 23 shows that they were not. And I'm just going to wrap it up real fast. In November of 2018, the city manager was requested to confer with the managing director of the water department and report back to the council on the age and condition of the water system so that this sort of thing could be avoided. I would really love to see such a report because I know it was requested again 2 weeks ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you can leave those comments or email? Okay, great. Excuse me. Louise Weed? Lee Ferris? I don't see Lee. Is there anyone who didn't? Okay, so let's try to do this in an orderly way. James?
Thank you. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place, Jefferson Park. I'm just very sympathetic to the idea of a moratorium on cutting down trees, but I think there's a glaring deficiency, and it's a little disappointing that nobody seems to be talking about it. But first of all, I want to make an observation about the language of the whereases, where with any subsidized affordable housing projects, I just want to stress that the biggest single subsidy for housing in the United States is not for affordable housing projects, but is the interest mortgage deduction. It's over $100 billion. It's sort of hidden in the federal tax code. I just want to make the observation that all of you who are taking that on your federal taxes are living in subsidized housing also. The thing that's disappointing to me, the problem with this I see is the exemption that's written into it that's just presumed to be unquestionable, which is for affordable housing, anything financed by the Affordable Housing Trust or otherwise for construction of low and moderate income housing. Don't we deserve the same tree protection that all the rest of you are claiming for yourselves? Are we second-class citizens, those who are lower income people in the city of Cambridge? We don't get to care about trees. Trees don't matter in the environment that we live in or are going to live in. It seems to me this is a really elementary matter of environmental justice. We should be able to have the same protections for the trees that are in our environment as you are asking for yourselves in the rest of the city of Cambridge. if in fact protection for trees for us is so onerously expensive that it shouldn't be part of this, then I think that needs to be changed, and I think it needs to be universal for the entire city. It needs to be modified so that the tree protection is the same for everybody. If the tree protection as proposed is reasonable and proper and appropriate for most of the city, then it should be extended to cover everybody. And I would like to understand why that shouldn't be the case. Jefferson Park, when they did the stateside recently, they were initially going to cut down all 96 trees. After a Board of Zoning appeal hearing, they agreed to leave 8 of the 96 trees. And then during construction, they cut down 4 of those without any request for permission to do so. So they cut down 92 of the original 92 of the 96 trees that were at that site. Now they're proposing to tear down all of the brick buildings on the federal side of Jefferson Park, 11 brick buildings. Now that means another total, according to their current planning, all of the trees of Jefferson Park will now be cut down. Now they're saying that the design process, they're saying they want connectivity to the neighborhood. We're to be connected with the neighborhood, but we're not to have the same rights as our neighbors. Plus, they're going to put 50% additional density on us, the people who already carry disproportionate burdens in Cambridge. So, thank you.
Thank you, James. I saw this hand. Gentleman, come up. Yep. Please state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on.
My name is Stephen Nutter. I'm the Executive Director of Green Cambridge. Very fortunate to have witnessed all the people who have spoken tonight. Many of them are connected to Green Cambridge in some way. We have a lot of very passionate, wonderful people in Cambridge. And, you know, you know that we're in a tree emergency. And we really just need the council's leadership to get us to a better future. The urgency of this matter cannot wait. As the executive director of Green Cambridge and with full and directed support from our board from last week, I urge the council to adopt Policy Order 29, including all the proposed amendments, including the moratorium. If you've been to any of the Urban Forest Master Plan meetings, which I really hope that you attend, the next one that's coming up, the group is really spectacular, as is all of the citizen volunteers who have done that. But I think that the pieces that they've shown is also very very clear. And the biggest thing is that by having some kind of a moratorium, having some sort of strong policy here is so much more than any kind of planning document or study that could ever be produced. It's something that everyone has to sit up and pay attention to, and that's what we need for just at least a few more months. I'm here, representing the thousands of residents that support Green Cambridge, and I ask you for action today. The task force recommendations are clear. We must protect the trees that we have. Thank you.
Anyone else? Come on up, Nicole. Hold on, Peter. Yeah, Nicola first.
Honorable Mayor, City Councilors, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have a cold, so sorry. So I wanted to speak regarding a few orders. Order number 1 on the flooding in West Cambridge, and also the upzoning and the tree and some reports that you have. But I think overall the theme that you should be hearing from a lot of my neighbors today is that we need to take a pause. We really need to take a pause. That's the message that we're getting, and I hope you guys are listening, because we're basically bursting at the seams. I mean, with the tree, just the mere mention of a moratorium on trees led to massive carnage of trees being cut all over the city. I mean, it was just crazy. We clearly have an infrastructure problem in terms of old waste pipes not being maintained. The power grid in East Cambridge, 98% capacity according to Eversource, and wanting to, put in more. So we have a major problem, and we need to slow down a little bit, take a pause, and really look at what do we really want to move forward, and listen to us, what we're saying. So my overall is take a pause, listen, and I support the moratorium until you get it together. Thanks.
Thank you. Peter, you were next.
Peter Valentine, 37 Brookline Street. On the subject of trees, you'll note that this meeting is being conducted very well. It operates in a certain way. Now, show me the book you have that explains the exact way you manage trees. You don't have any book. Okay? So, there is an exact way to manage everything. And you have got to study so that when a developer comes in, you tell that developer, here's what you can do, and here's what you can't do. Okay? And then we have taken our development casually. Someone comes in, they're going to develop, so forth and so on. We have got to think about exact ways of development, okay? I'm not going to let the trees be destroyed, okay? Because I believe in the creator of all of existence, and that's who helps me out. And you all do too.
Robert, and then the woman in the pink, and then over here. Your name, address, and the issue you're speaking on, please.
Hi, my name is Robert Winters, and I live at 366 Broadway. I don't know if anybody's ever seen me, but I'm also the guy that arranges to have the water put on the Lee Street Park. And I take very, very good care of a paperbark maple that's right in there. I prune it, I water it, I keep it alive through July and August. I also have a maple in my front yard that was planted by my tenant, Andrea, some years ago, which we keep in memory of her father. I'm not anti-tree. I've actually been maintaining trees in my yard for as long as I can. But the thing is that there is an ailanthus tree that's maybe about 3 feet away from the foundation of my house. It's not on my property, it's on the neighbor's property. I think it's a problem. Would the city arborist declare it to be dangerous? I'm not sure that he would say it was dangerous, but it's a problem. I have another ash tree that is leaning toward my house. It's a pretty big tree, way in excess of the minimum requirement for this proposed moratorium. I have treasured that tree for years, but it's actually reaching a point now with a leader leaning on my roof that has to be removed. And there may be very much a good argument to be made for removing that tree. I would like just to have the discretion to do that. I'm not one of the big evil developers that came whiskey into town cutting down 40 trees. I'm just a person who's been living in the same house for 40 plus years and owned it for, 34. And I just would like to have at least a little respect and a little discretion provided so that if I have to make a difficult decision, that I don't have to have somebody say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to make that decision anymore.
Thank you, Robert. So the woman in the pink, yep. Please state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on tonight.
Hi, my name is Joanne Taylor. I live on Norfolk Street in Cambridge. I was wondering, I was trying to ask him, I was wondering if he could maybe trim the tree down a little so it wouldn't be affecting his house. Anyway, I'd just like to say that trees are very beneficial, and they take carbon monoxide from us and give us oxygen. And we need trees, and they're also beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Anna Stothart. I'm at 25 Wood Street, and I've never spoken at anything like this. So I just wanted to say I support the tree moratorium, the tree cutting moratorium. I'm a psychologist, and the mental health benefits of the trees are profound, and it's also the sense of great despair that people are feeling in terms of climate change and not knowing what to do to make a difference. And I think we have an opportunity to make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come on up, state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on.
Good evening. Thanks for listening. I know you've heard all the arguments, all the descriptions.
Your name and address, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Rika Welsh, 616 Green Street. And I've lived on Green Street for 53 years. And I'm actually lived in Cambridge and been very active. I oversaw the wiring of these chambers when I worked for American Cable Systems when we built the system. And I was the government relations person. And we managed to build that cable system, by the way, without damaging trees and having an arborist involved in it. But I just simply want to add to the record that in 1966, when I moved to Green Street, the entire street was canopied by green trees. From Putnam Avenue, at least until Hancock, it was a beautiful canopied street. The only large tree remaining on Green Street today is in front of 616 Green Street because I've advocated, and David Lefcourt knows me very, very well. I'm one of those wacky Cambridge ladies as far as he's concerned. That's the only reason that tree is still there. So we just simply need to take, I'm speaking in favor, obviously, of the moratorium, but I also hope that everybody will walk around and look at how much the city has changed, how much we have lost. And I hope that you will support the moratorium and the work that a lot of people are doing on our behalf on that. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Mark Levy from Oxford Street. I just wanted to mention that Citizens Bank already has 20 branches and ATMs in Cambridge and Somerville alone. CBRE, the property manager for that property, didn't approach any neighborhood groups about bringing in a Citizens Bank or what else might go there. I asked if there had been any thought about making some sort of accommodation to keep the street lively, and there was no response. I just would, I think, maybe say that the awnings aren't necessary for an unnecessary Citizens Bank, considering the gigantic Citizens Bank branches at at Davis and Harvard Square. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, is there anyone else? All right. On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to close public comment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Public comment is closed. We now move to reconsiderations. There are none. We move to city manager's agenda on a motion by Councilor Carlone to bring the city manager's agenda before us for discussion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. City manager's agenda is before us. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Carlone.
Mr. Mayor, number 4, please.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 1 and number 3, please.
Pleasure of the council. There's only one left. Roll call.
On the consent agenda items, Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons. Yes. Council Toomey. Council Zondervan. Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the consent agenda item is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 1, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the transfer of $1,034,387 in the general fund between school department statutory accounts as follows. $1,034,387 from the salary and wages account to the school other ordinary maintenance account, $1,011,006 to the school travel and training account, $23,381, which are used for school improvement and professional development plans for all schools, school and department operating transfers to expedite purchases, expenses for special education student transportation, which are greater than anticipated, and to cover the cost of air quality testing and mold remediation at 4 schools. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just had a question about the mold issue that raised some concerns for me. So if you could just tell us more about which schools were affected and what exactly happened there.
Ms. Spinner?
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Zondervan. This early in the fall, late in the summer, at 3 schools, the Baldwin and the Morse and the Peabody, some mold issues were discovered. The most serious issues were in offices and other locations that were locked over the summer. We believed that the mold issues were caused because of a very, very humid summer this year, and older and in some cases undersized insulation of air distribution systems, possible building envelope water intrusion, and compromised vapor barriers. So essentially when these, so we did say 4 here. The 4th school was a slightly different situation in that there was actually flooring replaced at the Graham Parks this summer, and the contractor did not clean up properly. So there was some stone dust that needed to be cleaned up, and so that when we were putting this together, we mistakenly added that 4th issue that was an air quality issue, but it was not a mold air quality issue. It was a stone dust issue that had to be remediated. So at this point, there has been remediation. Their air quality tests have occurred, and all tests are at appropriate levels, and there's ongoing testing going on, and we do not have, any air quality issues related. We don't have any air quality issues and none related to mold at this point. There are still some, additional and further remediation that need to be done at Baldwin, which we will likely do over the February break. And this happens to be in 2 offices where we believe that though the air quality is fine, we believe there is mold in the walls in an office area. There's some possibility of mold between exterior and inside the sheetrock. And so we're going to be investigating that to determine if that is the case, and then the district will be determining a plan going forward as to how we will deal with this issue. But I will reiterate that at this moment, air quality is fine in every single school in all of our spaces. And for this summer and spring, we plan on being much more active and proactive around dehumidifying buildings, sealing the building envelope where possible, replacing damaged pipe, leaving doors open instead of locking. Lots of rooms get locked over the summer, and so ensuring that there is a better airflow in all of the rooms in our buildings over the summer.
Counselor?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Roll call.
On agenda item number 1, Council Carlone.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon. Thank you, Claire. Council Siddiqui. Yes. Council Simmons. Yes. Council Toomey. Yes. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
Council Mallon. Yes. And agenda item number 1 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 3, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $175,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Public Works Department Extraordinary Expenditures account to fund a climate change resilience analysis, which will focus on zoning recommendations, pulled by Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. First of all, I want to say thank you to the city manager and staff for putting this task force together. I was able to attend the first meeting along with Councilor Carlone, and was very impressed with the consultants and the participants and the way the meeting was conducted. So I really look forward to these results. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what these funds are going to pay for.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Zondervan, the funds are for both the facilitation as well as technical analysis. So the Consensus Building Institute are the facilitators because we anticipate that this is going to be a process that will benefit. There are divergent opinions and will really benefit from a very thorough facilitation that they will bring to the table. And on the technical analysis side, we are supplementing the budget of the CCPR consultants and also pulling in the consultants who are working on the urban tree canopy study, because both of those have a strong nexus with the work that the Resilience Zoning Task Force will be doing. So the funds will go to the Kleinfelder team, which includes a zoning person, as well as to the Reed Hildebrand team, which are working on the urban canopy, and then the Consensus Building Institute, as I mentioned earlier.
Councilor Zondervan.
Great, thank you. And again, I've been really impressed with CBI's work in the past and Reed Hildebrand's work on the Urban Forest Task Force. So I look forward to their work. Thank you.
I get Vice Mayor Devereaux and then Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just a follow-up question. So the task force is definitely a zoning task force. So there's been a lot of confusion about what prior task force and studies have done. But will they actually, in the time frame, in the year that they're meeting, produce draft zoning, or is it still sort of recommendations that then have to go to staff or to the law department to turn themselves into actual zoning language?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the task force will come up with the zoning principles rather than the specific zoning text, but we anticipate that it can be quite detailed. So, for instance, if they're talking about, I don't know, say percentage of open space, instead of just saying that that there ought to be significant open space, they might say the percentage ought to be 10% or 20% or whatever the number may be. So it can get pretty specific without the actual text, just because the text is so technical that it's not conducive to being created in a committee and will require law department input. And so once we can get all of the principles laid out, it's a lot more straightforward than for our zoning staff and the law department to put that together into words. We will, throughout the process, make sure that we are checking in with the law department so that if there is something that seems to be problematic, that we can tee that up for the task force during the process, so it's not something that is a surprise at the end.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that because you anticipate having these recommendations a year from now, that's being built into all the departments' workflow so that we don't get to a year from now and have a backup of other zoning petitions that need immediate attention and staff time. And I mean, time and again, the bottleneck is that we just don't seem to have the capacity to deal with all of the zoning in particular work that is coming at us right, left, and center. Some of it we're initiating, and some of it is coming from people in the public, and those are all on deadlines, and so things have to be done in a certain number of months. And it's just, I hope that as we're looking, for instance, at the budget, we're really anticipating that fiscal year, whatever that is, 20, is going to be very busy from a zoning standpoint. I don't see how it couldn't be, because we have other elements of the envision process that also will, in theory, be making their way into zoning. So thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have absolutely prioritized this, but it is, while there are certain things that we can anticipate that we know are brewing coming from property owners, we are almost always surprised by some that come up that we had not anticipated, just because the proponents did not think to come talk to us ahead of time. So I'm almost certain that there will be things that we have not thought about right now that will show up, that will need to move to the top of the pile just because they have a legal timeline associated with them. But in terms of the petitions that are generated from the side of city staff, and I would say even the council, the message that we have received from all of you is that this is of paramount importance and should be a top priority for us.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, there need to be two tracks. I mean, because our agenda is our agenda, and our agenda can't keep taking a back seat to whatever, iteration of certain zoning petitions that we've now seen 3 times, keep coming back for another bite at the apple. And that is sidetracking the very important agenda that we have. So if we need to have additional staff that can deal with developers and residents and people who have the next great idea for how they're going to change our zoning, great, but it can't sidetrack us from the actual work we're trying to do, because we're just not making headway. We had, last term we had the outdoor lighting ordinance that everybody invested a tremendous amount of time in, and it's just gone. So thank you. I'm sorry, but that's what I'm feeling right now. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, before I go to Councilor Carlo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was going to just say that we did add a position this year in the budget, and as we stated, with everything going on, we would certainly look if we needed another position next year. So it's a concern, but we will continue to do the best we can. But on this one here, it's clearly been a priority that we have set forward, and this will not be delayed with any. This will get to when it needs to be done and the schedule we set.
Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to completely concur with the Vice Mayor just said. Toward the Assistant City Manager, through the Mayor, when we talk about climate change resiliency and zoning, it isn't just the landscape, it's the buildings themselves. And I know you know that, and I've said this many times, glass buildings are the worst things to have environmentally, and that there are studies that show glass buildings literally heat the winter sky and heat the summer sky, and talk about heat buildup and the creation of future smog. There's an association. So I hope the consulting team has that expertise as well, because if not, we're dealing with part of the solution that's been avoided in the past, historically in the country, but we can't forget where much of the problem is, and that's the built structure of buildings. There has to be a balance, and it's not really indicated here or in your comments that that will be part of it, but when we get to the ordinance, we will bring it up as part of it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Pleasure of the council. Roll call.
On agenda item number 3, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Counsel Mallon?
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui?
Yes.
Counsel Simmons? Counsel Toomey? Yes. Counsel Zondervan?
Yes.
Mayor McGovern?
Yes.
And the item is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Thank you. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 4, a communication transmitted from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to a request for approval to seek authorization from the Massachusetts Office of the Inspector General, the IG, that's kind of cool, from the city to use the Construction Manager at Risk, CMAR, procurement and construction method, the CMAR method, in connection with the multi-department relocation plan. Pulled by Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't probably have to say this, but this is a very standard type of agreement. One of the earliest buildings I worked on in the 1970s actually had an earlier form of this, and that building could not have been built without this because of some unknown conditions. So I am totally in favor of that, but I have some side questions as to seeing the Phase 2 document. And we're very happy to hold a committee meeting, or we could have separate meetings that maybe will work better, just to understand what the recommendations are. Just as an aside, during the meeting, if any of us have to use a bathroom, it's not next door. And the women's bathroom is worse. It's on a different floor. There was some talk of splitting council offices, which I think is absolutely ridiculous and defeats the purpose of having offices. Things like that. So I hope before it moves on, there is direct input, and so that we're all on the same page early on. You don't have to respond to that now. We can talk later, but maybe you did respond, but
Deputy City Manager?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. We have a draft feasibility study that is completed for City Hall. And what we need to do is complete the master planning for 831 and 3 Bigelow first, because we want to understand, in particular, the third floor of this building, what we're doing with the servers and what we're doing, where the servers, if they could be relocated to 831, and the training room as well. The bottom line is that when we do complete the feasibility study and we're ready to move on to design development, which is before we move on to design development, we're very, very happy to sit down and talk to the whole council and to get feedback, because we want to make sure that the council is satisfied with the design. We are considering individual offices, and we are looking at gender-neutral bathrooms on the second floor as well of this building. So we'd be happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I might also say that even the portion of City Hall would be informative, knowing that it will change given the impact. I was in the server room, the training room today, and it moved very slowly on the screen. So there's no question in my mind there's a major upgrade, if not relocation. And I hope 831 is a new building for many reasons, including urban design as well as additional space. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anything further? Question comes on adopting the order. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Before you leave, Mr. Manager, I'm going to ask that we move suspension to bring forward policy order number 7. I did have some conversations with the manager, and I think there's some important information that we need to talk about. So on suspension.
Can we also bring forward committee report number 3, which is referenced by the policy order?
We can. So on suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it on bringing forward policy order number 7 and committee report number 3. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So I don't quite know where to begin. I did have some. So well, let me start, and then I have a few points that I can make a little bit later. So I just want to start by saying, first of all, we obviously had a large turnout of folks in favor of this moratorium on trees, on cutting down trees. I appreciate that. I also want to say, just for my own acknowledgement, I appreciate the fact that Councilor Zondervan and others who have, I've learned a lot. I will honor, we can't all be passionate about every single thing, and I will tell you that, as much as I love trees were not. I didn't know as much about trees and the tree canopy a year ago as I do now, and so I appreciate that. And I think, as we heard many people say, I think the whole council appreciates what trees bring to the city. But I did have some questions, and I think some other councilors had some questions about this particular policy order and implications of this order and just how to do this well. And so I had some conversation with the manager today, and I'd like to just have those discussions openly so that we can decide on what is the best route in moving this forward. So I guess I will hold my questions a little bit. I will open it up to the Mr. Manager. Did you guys do you want to just wait and take questions, or do you want to? Okay, Councilor Zondervan.
Thanks. As the primary proponent, I would like to speak to the proposal. So first of all, I want to remind us that the original amendment to require a permit was put in June of last year, before the task force began meeting. And that was part of 3 emergency orders that I had put forward because of the extensive canopy loss that we had documented. And the other 2 orders have already delivered results, including planting additional trees in some of our parks, which was accomplished this fall, and an accounting of any public trees that need to be cut down, which is also being practiced. But this particular order didn't come forward until the ordinance committee hearing recently. So it's taken some time, and the Urban Forest Master Plan Task Force has been doing fantastic work, as I think everyone acknowledges. And we very much look forward to the results of that effort. I think in the meantime, however, we have a major problem. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've been personally alerted to and witnessed several large tree removals in Cambridge, including the apparently illegal removal of 12 trees in the Alewife Reservation. And it's really unconscionable that that happened, and that there is no real recourse right now for that destruction that took place. I am working with State Senator Jalen's office to investigate the removal of those trees in the Alewife Reservation, and hopefully there will be some accounting for that activity. We're seeing, unfortunately, with the publicity that's coming with the proposal for a moratorium, we're seeing the potential for additional trees being removed in anticipation of it. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to make a decision. If we're going to have a moratorium, and I think obviously that we should, then we should decide that as soon as possible, ideally tonight, so that we can begin implementing it. If we continue to debate it and debate it and debate it, we're only going to suffer more tree loss. I think you've seen the level of public support for taking action. It's way overdue, and I hope that we can find a way tonight to put a moratorium on the destruction of trees in our city while the task force completes their work, and as soon as they put forward recommendations that we can implement, that we believe would be sufficient at that time, we can put a stop to the moratorium as well. Thank you.
Questions from the Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to, I think this is probably directed to the solicitor. So I had a few questions around basically enforcement, and before that, the piece of, and I will say that I'm generally supportive of this issue, but I have questions. If we say, okay, we're in favor of the moratorium, what's that look like tomorrow, a week from now? What are the actual implications? Can we actually enforce it? And what are the legal issues associated with a moratorium that we're maybe overlooking? I'm new to this area of law, so I was wondering if you had insight on that.
Ms. Glowa.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think I have a lot of answers right now because this is fairly new that's just come to us. I would say that if you look at the enforcement provisions in the ordinance, it talks about the fine of $300 being imposed per violation, and each violation or each day that the violation continues is a separate fine of $300. So one sort of logistical consideration is that the Public Works Department, who would be enforcing this through the tree warden, would need to arrange to get ticket books and to be able to issue tickets, because we have had experience with other ordinances where the ordinance provides for the sanction of a fine, that the courts have indicated that we need to be able to issue a ticket in order to collect on those fines. So that's one logistical issue that would need to be addressed. The other thing I would note is that it appears to us that this would need to be moved to a second reading unless the council were able to determine that there was an emergency, and then the emergency circumstances have to be laid out fully and require a separate vote of the council of 2/3 of the council in order to declare an emergency, in order to pass something all on one night the first time it's introduced. And since this new amendment is being introduced for the first time tonight, it would suggest that ordinarily that would require moving it to a second reading. So that's just one piece that I wanted the council to be aware of. And then, so with respect to enforcement, I don't know what other questions you might have. I think that, usually we take a little bit of time, particularly with the second reading where it's advertised. And there's another section of the state law that requires things to be advertised 10 days in advance of enactment. And that's the kind of notice that usually is provided to make sure that the word gets out to the community of actions that the council is considering before action is taken. So that's probably another reason for the requirement to move to a second reading. And I don't know if the clerk wanted to add anything to that, but so those are the legal issues that I can think of. Other than, finally, I would just note that there seems to be a little bit of ambiguity in some of the language in the new section being proposed of 8.66.055. So if this were moved to a second reading, it would give us time to review and perhaps come back with a little bit of clarifying language that we think might make the ordinance hang together a little bit better, and we would welcome that opportunity. So I certainly would like to have Commissioner O'Riordan have an opportunity to weigh in, since he would be enforcing. So I'll turn it over to...
Before you go, Mr. O'Riordan, the clerk would like to make a comment.
Committee report number 3 also contains an amendment, which the ordinance committee had 6 members. So it's scripted that you accept the report, place on file, and pass to a second reading as amended. Order number 7 is an additional amendment to that. So they need to decide what they're going to do with order number 7, if it's going to be rolled into what's in committee report number 3.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just add, that was the part that I was saying would need to be moved to a second reading tonight, that was not previously before the council prior to tonight, if it's acted upon.
Mr. O'Riordan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. From an administrative perspective, in order to be able to accomplish the new provisions in this chapter, we would need to promulgate regulations. In other words, we would want to be able to inform people who are proposing to take down a tree as to how they should go about it. We also need, obviously, to produce a buck of tickets so that in the event that someone violated the ordinance, we would be able to issue violation notices to them. And it's our expectation that if someone is taking down a tree on their property, a significant tree, that they will need an arborist to be able to certify that that tree is either dead, diseased, or dangerous in accordance with the new language that's being proposed. It would not be appropriate for the city arborist to make that determination, but rather we would require that to be certified by an independent arborist. So I think we would value this being moved to a second reading so as to be able to provide those regulations and begin to put in place the ticketing system necessary and the permitting system necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Siddiqui, you okay for now?
Yes, thanks.
Councillor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Commissioner O'Riordan and the City Solicitor, thank you for answering my many questions that I had today. I do have some additional questions that I'd just like you to speak to here in this room that I have concerns about. And to speak to my colleague's earlier point that there's been a permitting process proposed since June, yes, that's definitely true, and that is what we passed from the Ordinance Committee meeting to be here in front of us tonight. What was not noticed publicly since June is a one-year moratorium on cutting down any private tree. And I think that's really where some of this is getting tricky for me. I've had a number of residents call me today to ask me how this would impact them, how much that would cost if they were going to take down a tree, for example, to put an addition on their yard, on their house, so that their mother-in-law can move in, right? So what is the cost to the homeowner if there's a moratorium and they take down the tree? I also, so I'd like to ask Commissioner O'Riordan about the cost of the tree. I know that you mentioned a $300 per day every time you don't pay the fine, which you and I talked earlier, a 1-inch tree costs around $1,000. So to replace an 8-inch tree at diameter at breast height would cost around $8,000. So it's going to be $8,000 and then $300 a day. I want to understand what we're talking about here in terms of cost. So that's my first question. My second question, I think you answered, is that the homeowner would have to hire a private arborist and we couldn't use the city arborist. So that's another additional cost. And I just want to caution us, we've talked in this chamber before about using the term public support for something that we actually don't know has a broad public support. Yes, there were a lot of people here tonight speaking in support of it. I would say that the majority of Cambridge does not know that this is going on. It has not been properly noticed. And I would also say that we're having a resource fair for people who have been impacted by the government shutdown at the exact same time, assuming that there's no overlap. So I have concerns around the public noticing, and to speak to one of the earlier speakers tonight around the carve-out for affordable housing or subsidized housing, and it being an environmental justice issue. So I do think we need some more work on this particular amendment if we are going to pass it and move forward. I would like to ask Commissioner O'Riordan just to speak to the costs, and then I have a couple other questions.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, so we have just recently executed a new tree planting contract for the city, and starting this spring. And our expectation is that to plant a tree, to water it for 3 years, and to prune it once within a 5-year period, it'll cost between $1,700 and $1,900. So we generally plant 2-inch trees. So if you divide that number in two, you'll get something in the order of between $800 and $900 per inch. That's the cost to us in terms of planting a tree.
So if one is to remove a significant tree, that's a tree of 8 inches or greater, minimum cost would be in the order of $7,000. If you have a 20-inch tree on your property, that cost would run between $14,000 and $16,000. $14,000 and $16,000 if you're to remove it. So that's presently the way we calculate the replacement value of trees.
Thank you. Councilor Mellon?
Thank you, Commissioner. And, you know, so let's say somebody takes down a tree. We passed this tonight. Somebody takes down a tree next week. They, you know, your team notices that the tree is down. You notice the homeowner that they owe you $7,000 on something that they had no idea had even happened. I mean, I think the communication piece is going to be critical. I think a number of people mentioned it tonight. We had a 3-year Envision process that I think the city did an incredible job marketing and letting people know about, that a lot of people didn't even know was happening until like 4 months ago. So to have that much of a significant impact on cost is concerning for me at this point, given that this agenda came out Thursday at 5 o'clock, and here we are talking about it 3 days later. So I do have some significant concerns around the governance of this and how to move forward. So I appreciate you all being here tonight to answer some of these questions here tonight and having answered many of these earlier today.
Vice Mayor Devereaux?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I realize this is a difficult issue for many. To me, it's very clear that we have an emergency. And it's also very clear that the longer we debate this and the longer we worry about what if we can't notify all 114,000 residents of Cambridge that there is a new law, then we can't do it. To me, it just sounds like kicking the can down the road. And we've had members of our Public Planting Committee, members who are also members of the Tree Task Force, support the need for stopping discretionary tree removals. As someone has pointed out, it costs a lot to remove a significant tree, even if it's dead, and no one is stopping anyone from removing a dead, dangerous, or diseased tree. We are talking about optional removals, and that has a public cost. And so, yes, it may be inconvenient during this time of a moratorium to have to wait, and yes, it may increase the cost of a discretionary change to your landscaping or your home. But that is a public cost. And the consultant to the Tree Task Force has even recommended stricter definitions of what a significant tree is. They are saying, you know, we picked 8 inches when we did the tree protection ordinance. Other cities have 6 inches. So this is a pretty basic extension of our existing tree protection ordinance. We're taking the same diameter tree, 8 inches. We're exempting trees on affordable housing, and I certainly agree that that's an issue of social justice. And if it were my law to write, I would not make that exemption. That exemption is already in the existing law, and we are not seeking to change that. And there's no slight to any residents of affordable or subsidized housing, because it is absolutely important from a public health standpoint that all residents have access to good quality air, shade, and, you know, the other values that trees bring in close proximity. It's not okay just to say, well, there's some other trees. If you drive out, you know, into the suburbs or take a bus out into the suburbs, there are lots of trees, so you don't really need to have trees near where you live. Not supporting that. So I think we should pass this tonight. Getting tickets, a ticket book, I don't know what's really involved in that. You know, we have computers, we can make forms. To me, it seems like we're looking for excuses to delay this, and the longer we delay it, the more people are going to decide to preemptively cut down trees, and that this is an emergency. Thank you.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in favor of what some people are referring to as a moratorium. I don't know that we actually know what it is we're talking about, though. As far as I can tell, and perhaps someone can correct me if I'm wrong, all we are doing is saying if you're not subject to essentially a large project review, and you don't get a permit, if you cut down a tree, you will have to pay into the tree replenishment fund some amount of money, no less than $5,000. So for a project that is a large project, like many of them are, this isn't relevant. So it really comes down to, is what you're working with something that you are worried about paying the cost on? So if you're talking about an infill development, for example, and we can pick any number, I think many of us are familiar with 9 Donnell Street. If you're talking about a development like that, there might be 3, 4, 5 trees on that property that could come down. You know, maybe that's going to cost you $50,000, but you paid $950,000 for the property. You're going to knock the house down that's there. You're going to put up 2 new houses. They're going to go for something like $3.6 million together. The $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that you pay in tree mitigation funds is sort of a rounding error. So someone that's doing property development like that may just look at this as a cost of doing business, and someone like me, who I've cut down 2 trees either on or near my property, and I climbed up and I roped myself off and I used a little saw and I cut them down myself, it never would have occurred to me that I needed a permit. Now, I like the idea of needing a permit, and I'm upset that our neighbors cut down a bunch of trees. I'm glad they kept some. So figuring out who this impacts and how, I think, is really, really complex, and I suspect it's going to impact that sort of homeowner that's got a 12-inch, an 8-inch, something rather diameter tree that's not huge, and that homeowner says, you know, I want a garden, or I want a whatever, and it comes down. I don't think this is going to do what we want it to do. I wish we would have kept it in committee. We didn't, and I think it's on me that it didn't get to committee early enough, so I apologize for that and take responsibility for not moving this to committee sooner. I would love to move it back to committee. If the council as a body decides that we want to vote for it now, I will support it. But I don't think it is going to get us what we want, which is protection of trees from the people that are doing projects now that are not covered under the existing large project permit. So there we have it. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to the commissioner. When a permit is being reviewed, I assume that they will look at all the issues present and will consider dire circumstances or an unusual situation as part of their determination, like any review board. Is that true? Do you have that range of, or you don't think you do?
I don't think so. We're not provided that discretion.
I see. Well, that's interesting. I do think there's a similarity to what is being discussed here and what used to happen in the city, and that was the asphalting of yards, primarily for parking for apartments. And the city changed the rules of the amount of asphalt anybody could do in their yard for similar reasons, environmental. And I know of one case, a developer asphalted the backyard of a dwelling, I think it was 3 units, but maybe 2 units in Cambridgeport, and the city made that person dig it all up and restored the yard because the change in the asphalting occurred after the ordinance had passed. And I think that was the right thing to do. All the neighbors were thrilled with that. However, they lost trees in that process. So I am for this in principle. I agree details have to be worked out. But we're in a crisis. And I think the analogy that the vice mayor had about kicking the can down the road is right on, and I concur with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to chime in here if I may. And this is probably going to surprise some people because I'm not a moratorium guy. I think moratoriums often are it's using a hammer to oftentimes address issues. And but I actually think that some kind of moratorium is appropriate. But I do want to say this is really important, and I want to talk process for a second. A number of people who spoke tonight and who were in the audience are upset that Inman Square, after multi-year process and dozens of community meetings, is going forward, and they're saying there hasn't been enough talk. Yet those same people want us to pass an ordinance tonight that's going to go into effect in the next couple of weeks that no public conversation about it, no process. I get it, right? When you want something and you're passionate about something, process, forget the process, let's just do it. I feel the same way about a lot of things. I've been spending the last several months learning more and more about safe injection sites, right? I am convinced that they save people's lives. It would be completely outrageous for me to put in an order to open a safe injection site tomorrow without some kind of community process to talk about it, no matter how badly I think it's a good thing to do. So, and, you know, with due respect to Vice Mayor, you know, if we're talking about a big developer who cuts down, if that developer, we find out that developer cut down 11 trees on Cambridge property against the law, fine them through the nose. I don't care. Fine them more than you think you could possibly fine them. I'm fine with that. I don't care about the big developers. But if you're a small homeowner who doesn't know this is happening, and you cut down a tree and you get a bill for $10,000 from the city, that's not an inconvenience. An inconvenience is a flat tire. Getting a bill from the city when you didn't know that something was even in effect for $10,000 could bury you. And I guarantee you that if we were passing a policy order tonight or changing an ordinance tonight that gave some benefit to developers, that everyone who came out tonight would be yelling, not enough process, you're blindsiding us. And they'd be right. They'd be right. But yet they want us to do that because it's something that they feel strongly about. So I just want to bring us back to having some integrity about the process. You cannot, on one hand, say, we believe in process and transparency, but only when it's something we want to stall or we don't like. But if it's something we do like, process be damned. You can't do that. I'm not going to do that. I mean, anybody can do what they want, but you're asking, that's, you know, so I agree with this in spirit. I think there needs to be some tweaks, but there has not been, the policy order that's in front of us tonight was not the policy order discussed even in that one ordinance committee meeting. So we can't even go back and say there was one meeting about it. There's none. There was no meeting. Imagine, those of you who are in support of this, if there was no public meeting and you knew nothing about something, that a change that we made that you disagreed with. Imagine what your outcry would be. But yet that's what you're asking us to do tonight. So I think this needs to go back to ordinance. This particular policy order, it should have a fair hearing. It should have a process. The city should be able to give a full report. And I'm fine with passing something that goes into effect for, you know, or for a year. I guess the committee report's going to come out sooner than a year. But I'm open to some kind of discussion about that because I do believe it's a problem. But I'm not going to say process be damned just because it's convenient. And nobody should. We need to have some integrity. So I think this needs to go back to ordinance. I got Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Carlone, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to address some of the points that have been raised. Regarding process, the ordinance committee meeting was on January 9th, and a moratorium was discussed by the public and brought to our attention. I do agree that the moratorium as proposed in this policy order was not before us at that time, but there was plenty of discussion. In terms of the trees, the tree canopy declining and us needing to take action, that conversation goes back 3 years. So I hear you and I understand what you're saying in terms of process, but this is not news to people who've been paying attention to this issue at all. Regarding the people who are not paying attention, very few people, perhaps excepting Councillor Kelly, will take down their own large trees on their property. So what is going to happen is that they will call an arborist to come look at the tree and a professional landscaping company to take it down. So in terms of notification, similar to what we've done with leaf blowers, what we've done with recycling haulers, there is a relatively short list of landscapers that we would need to contact to alert them to the moratorium. And they would inform their customers when asked to take down a tree that, well, there's a permit required now, and by the way, there's a moratorium. So I think that is quite doable in terms of informing the relevant parties who will actually be impacted most directly. I do believe the language includes emergency situations. It is not specified exactly what that means, precisely to give our staff some leeway in making that determination. And perhaps there's ways to improve on that language to give some more leeway. I do agree that it is useful for our staff to be able to look at a situation and say, well, yes, we have a moratorium, but in this particular case, that tree really does need to come down. And of course, it does exempt dangerous, diseased, and dead trees as well. Lastly, I will say that in terms of people not being aware of this, I ran a survey about a year ago asking about a moratorium on cutting trees, and we had about 60% of respondents who were in favor, and about 20% who were willing to consider it pending details. We did another recent survey that came back with similar results. So again, of course, we can never be saying that everybody knew about it or responded to it, but I do believe that there is quite a bit of knowledge out there on this issue, and that is reflected not just tonight, not just on the 9th Ordinance Committee hearing, but also in the letters that we've received and in ongoing conversations on this issue for 3 years at least.
Council, question before I go. You mentioned that many people came to the Ordinance Committee meeting and talked about a moratorium. Was a moratorium mentioned in the call of the meeting that it would be discussed? No.
No.
So those people came out to talk about something that wasn't even a call of the meeting. So they came out of a coordinated effort of people to come out and talk in favor of a moratorium. The general public, not knowing, not part of Green Cambridge or anywhere else, would not have received that call to action and would look in the paper and not know that a moratorium is being discussed. So I think, again, I'm trying to, we talk all the time about accountability, and I'm just trying to keep us honest here. And I get it, and if this had stayed in committee and we could have published it and we could have had more, I'm not saying it has to have 12 meetings. It doesn't have to have 2 years of meetings like Inman Square, but it wasn't even noticed. It wasn't even noticed. And you would never stand for that if it was something that was pro-development or pro-something else that you didn't like. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I was going to ask Commissioner O'Riordan or any of the staff about how many landscape companies actually do tree removals. The ones that I've seen of the very significant trees have very significant equipment. So my guess is it's a small number of tree contractors to get the word out, sort of following up on what Councillor Zondervan was saying. This is not your gardener who also mows your lawn and uses a leaf blower. This is a person who brings a crane and a trailer and, a team of people. I saw this happening on Craigie Street. I, like Councillor Zondervan, am now getting phone calls wherever I am. Quick, there's a tree being removed. Get over there. Can you get to Craigie Street? Go see what's happening. Saturday morning, gigantic tree, gigantic. It looked like a logging company had parked on Spark Street. And maybe the tree was dead. I don't know. The trunk didn't look dead. It was all cut, and I could walk right up to it, and it didn't see any signs of rot. I'm not an arborist. I would love to know why that tree was removed. Again, I think this is actually not as big a problem of getting the word out as we're making it seem. And I keep going back to the fact that this is an emergency. I don't know what other definition of an emergency we need to say that we are entitled to do this to keep people from preemptingly removing healthy trees. There should be a cost to that. There's no question in my mind.
Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I raised my hand, I had some comments which have been said, but I'll try not and repeat what's been recently said. Anybody cutting a tree needs a license. I had a contractor friend, I use the word had, who decided to take down a tree in Lexington, his own tree, with his son, and even though you put a rope around a branch to prevent it from coming down and hitting somebody, when branches come down, they bounce around, and he was killed on the ground. And he was the most robust, he looked like a contractor, most robust person you could ever imagine. And about a year after that, I heard of one of our fellow councilors doing the same thing, and that I was very concerned. Number one. Number two, if they're licensed, we know exactly who they are, and you could even go 100 miles out and know who they are. And I agree with my fellow councilors that they can be notified. At the same time, the procedural comments from the mayor are absolutely right on target, and I feel that we should follow process, but the emergency character of this, and given the time of year, with snow and ice on the ground, not the best time to cut down trees, I think a moratorium, short-term moratorium with further discussion during the moratorium can be handled and seems quite reasonable to me. Do I think the wording should be modified? Yeah, possibly, and especially given the timing and the report on the tree canopy, but the concept is solid in my mind. And this is probably something we all should have learned years ago. Same with some of the other issues that I mentioned on buildings, which drive me crazy. But now we know a great deal. So even though I think the procedure would warrant further study, I think we can do an interim moratorium based on the knowledge we have now and then modify as we need in the future. Thank you.
I would just caution us that when we define emergency, I think we have a housing emergency. I think we have an opioid epidemic emergency. I think we have a poverty emergency. I think we have lots of emergencies. And we either are going to have a process and be true to that process, or we're not. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you. I agree with sending it back to the ordinance committee. I don't think it should have left there in the first place. I don't think that we have violated the legal status of process at any rate. And we did clarify that to some extent with the clerk. That being said, anyone thinking that we're going to talk about a moratorium at the ordinance committee meeting wasn't reading the notice, because we weren't going to talk about a moratorium. It wasn't part of it. But to go back, my mom does think I'm special. So I may be one of those few people that cuts down their own trees. I also cut down my neighbor's tree, and I asked the neighbor if I could cut it down. It was a great big tree, and the neighbor said yes. And according to this, the way we've got it currently written, my neighbor would be liable for the cutting down of the tree. And there's also some, I think, confusion about what a significant tree is, and maybe the Commissioner of DPW could help us out. But when I just right now was trying to figure out what an 8-inch in diameter at breast height tree looks like, there seems to be a fair amount of variation in tree species at actually how big that is. So we think no one's going to go out and cut down a 70-foot tall tree, and I'm not going to do that, right? But not all significant trees are really that intimidating. So we could find, realistically, people with relatively thick but short trees that they feel aren't significant, have no clue this might apply to them, may consider them shrubs, and they go out and cut them down on a Saturday morning with no danger to anyone, and yet they could be liable for $5,000 worth of tree mitigation funds. And I think we should discuss that in more detail before we decide that's the right thing. So to go back to 9 Donnell Street, there are millions and millions of dollars changing hands in a property transaction like 9 Donnell Street. Close to $1 million to buy the property, and then the two properties that get subdivided sell for close to or well over $3 million. It's hard to believe that a property developer like that is going to be dissuaded from cutting trees down because it's an extra $40,000 or $50,000. So I think we need to be clearer about who this will impact, and I suspect it's going to impact the person that is not a developer but is interested in having a flower garden, or conceivably putting in as happened with my neighbors, putting in a bathroom for their aged mother so that she could have some place where she could actually bathe and go to the bathroom. To me, that's who gets impacted by this, and I think we should at least talk in more detail about that and make sure that we've got the ordinance that we want and understand its impacts before we move forward. So I would support moving this back to the ordinance committee, and I hope that is what we do tonight. I think we'll get to a moratorium eventually, and it's not even a moratorium, it's a buyout, right? You can buy out cutting your tree down. It's not something that says you can't, and as I understand the language, even the cease and desist orders and so forth do not keep people from cutting their trees down under the proposal. So I just don't think we've thought this through enough.
So what I'm going to recommend, and we can vote, so I'm making an amendment, formal amendment, that we send this policy order number 7 to the ordinance committee for a meeting to be held no later than the end of February 2019. So this is going to drag on. We can notice it properly. People, if nobody shows up in opposition to this, they lost their chance. We're ready to go. But we cannot deny people the opportunity to have a chance for input. We wouldn't stand for it if it was the other way around. So that's my amendment. Vote. Roll call.
Yep.
Oh,
Could
you
we
want to
discuss
discuss it? Yeah,
discussion?
go ahead, Councilor Carl.
Mr. Mayor, through you to the city clerk, how quickly could we have a city ordinance discussion at an ordinance meeting?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Carlone, when something is referred to the ordinance committee, according to the municipal code, it has to be advertised once in a newspaper, and the legal notice has to be within 7 days of the hearing. So upon checking the hearing schedule, we would probably be able to have one maybe the end of February.
Councilor Carlone.
Mr. Mayor, the reason I asked that question is to see if we could cut that time if indeed this is approved, and I see some dates. I mean, I realize we're pretty overextended, but the week of February 18th, there are open evenings.
The clerk is on vacation, and it's, I don't know what people say, school
I didn't know
vacation.
that. Well, we could go where the clerk is, and
Yeah, where are you going?
now I take back my comment. Thank you.
or
I
not?
have Councilor Simmons and Councilor Zahn.
Thank you. Just a question either to you or to the clerk. I think it's quite appropriate to send it back to the ordinance committee, and we'll vote to support that. In part, and I appreciate and certainly understand the need to protect the tree canopy, but you always want to do the right thing the right way. And so my concern is, and we do work in an extraordinary way to reach out to stakeholders. And something like this is important. So for me, I want to make sure, particularly it's going to go back to the ordinance, and particularly we're saying, if you're going to come to this meeting, we're going to have this discussion at this meeting, and so you need to weigh in on it. Most ordinance committees meetings are in the evening, so I'm not going to worry so much about that. But my other concern is, how do we reach as broad a population of people that this change is going to impact? I don't know if we have email addresses to say, send it out to people so that as much. I mean, with those folks that support this change are going to bring out their constituency, but for the person that the normal Jane and Joe that own homes and have trees in their yard are not going to be impacted by it. They often don't know until it has happened. And so my only concern is, how do we reach out? And this goes for everything, not just this, but how do we reach out appropriately? So the more procedural we are and thoughtful in our outreach, the more people will know and more people will be able to participate. And so I think it's the right thing to do to send it back to the ordinance committee, but I also want to, as a part of that, to make sure that we have reached out as well and as thoroughly as we can so that people are apprised of what we're trying to do and what we're talking about, and they can participate. Thank you.
Councilor Zondervan, and then Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so happened that I ran into someone over the weekend who will put this on TV if we pass a moratorium. So I don't think we'll have any trouble letting people know. The press will take quite an interest if we pass a moratorium on tree removal, and they will help us get the word out. I appreciate the discussion and request for additional time. Unfortunately, if we move this back to the ordinance committee, all we're doing is giving people more time to cut down more trees. If all we're asking for is that there be more process and more notification and people can be aware of what we're doing and provide their input, if we move it to a second reading, that will give us 10 days. So that's at least 2 weeks before it would come back before the council. That's plenty of time to work with the staff on any additional language tweaks that we think are necessary. It would accomplish both goals of providing the process and the notice to the public that you're asking for, and it would speak to the urgency of moving this forward and not putting it back into the ordinance committee. As we just heard, it probably won't get a hearing until the end of February. Then it has to come back to the council. Then it has to be moved to second reading. So we're talking about a couple of months where we do not have this moratorium in place, where we will see more and more trees being cut down. And the more we reach out to people to let them know this is coming, the more we will see trees being cut down. So it's a very delicate balance, and I don't think that's a good idea for us to be doing. I think if we move this to a second reading, we will have plenty of time to discuss it and to have people become aware of the issue.
So a good question, Councilor. Then I'll go to the Vice Mayor. So there's a difference, I think, between informing people, which is a concern that we talked about, and also people having the chance to be heard. Maybe we could inform people over the next 10 days, but that there's no opportunity for the opposition to this to be heard. Because they can come out, I guess, at the next meeting, but by then it's done. again, there was hours of discussion a couple of weeks ago about whether or not we should vote a symbolic motion to support a housing initiative at the State House during their informal session. And some of the same people who are saying it's an emergency, let's move forward now, are saying, no, don't support that happening during informal session. People haven't been heard. There hasn't been discussion. So I'm just cautioning us, if this is your emergency, our emergency, but if you feel like this is the thing that we should say process, shouldn't matter, the next time someone else brings up something where you feel that the process hasn't been sufficient, don't complain about it. And I'm saying that generally. I mean, I'm just trying to if we have one meeting and it's well advertised and it's out there and nobody comes out, or maybe 1 million people come out against it, my guess, I'm still going to vote for this in some capacity. I'm just talking about doing it the right way. We would be livid if this was something you didn't support and the same exact thing was happening. Vice Mayor.
Well, I mean, I certainly hear you, but I don't think those are necessarily fair analogies, because we're talking about removing trees it's final for that tree. There's no going back. We can make decisions that we can amend or revise or reconsider. This is ending the life of a tree, and we've heard plenty of evidence that mature trees are way undervalued, even in this version of the law. So I think it still does qualify it as an emergency. I think no amount of hearing people who will find reasons to be opposed to what is still a temporary moratorium, not a final change to the ordinance that prevents them from ever removing a tree. This is a temporary moratorium to give the task force time to act. Everybody loves trees until it's somehow inconvenient to them to love the tree, and then it's just, well, it's only one more tree, and those other trees will make up for the difference, and we'll get on with it. So we are never going to make everybody happy, no matter how many hearings we have. There will be people who will not like the decision because it affects them. So if we think we have a canopy emergency, which I think we all agree we do, and if we think we need to do something in the interim while this task force works, by the time a hearing happens at the end of February and goes through the rest of the ordinance process, and there are this, that, and the other, will be probably in, mid-April by the time we vote on it. And at that point, the task force will be almost done. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I'm frustrated because I just think it's too important to delay. I won't support the amendment.
Right.
But
thank you. I hear that, and I respect people's difference of opinion. I mean, I will say to a lot of people not moving forward on housing production, who are homeless and are going to die in the street, that's an emergency too. I mean, I'm just saying, everyone has their definition of what's an emergency, and either we have a process or we don't. So, and like I said, I foresee myself supporting something. Obviously, I'm not going to say yes until I see the language, but I don't disagree with the intent. I think we have to hold ourselves accountable. So my amendment, my motion is to, move that Policy Order 7 be sent to the Ordinance Committee with a meeting to be scheduled before the end of February. Roll call.
Council Calhoun.
No.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
No.
Council Kelly. Yes. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
No.
Council Simmons.
Yes.
Council Toomey.
Yes.
Council Zondervan.
No.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the motion carries on an affirmative vote with 5 in favor and 4 recorded in the negative.
We now move on to calendar items. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Like to pull number 3, please.
Pleasure of the council. So both the others are pending from the legislature. We can't do anything with those. So number 3, legal opinion on Portland's relocation assistance ordinance. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to formally send this to the Blue Ribbon Commission. I know they are about to meet, so yeah.
Yes, fine, Councilor Siddiqui, you're the chair. Okay, so on a motion by Councilor Zondervan to send this to the Tenant Protection Blue Ribbon Commission on Tenant Protections, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, what? Move suspension of the rules to bring forward a late communication establishing the task force before we send it to them. On suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Do I have that here? So this is a late communication from my office. Establishing the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Task Force for Tenant Displacement. This task force is going to be chaired by Councilor Siddiqui. The first meeting will be held on Tuesday, January 29th, that's tomorrow, 5:30 to 7:30, right here in the Sullivan Chamber. The members are, do you want to do this, since you're the chair? No? Teresa Cardosi, Kong Lee, Jessica Drew, Patrick Barrett, Larry Field, Cheryl Ann Pizzazzioli, Beth Hung, Sean Hope, Betsy Eichel, Sonia Anjudar, Alexandra Markowitz, Maura Penzak, and there will be someone from CDD, but I cannot appoint someone from CDD, so the manager has to put in his letter, which he will do. But this is a mix. Do you want to talk about the mix of the committee?
Sure. So it's a mix of many residents, many tenants, and then there's a mix of attorneys who also live in Cambridge, who work directly with tenants, and then there's a representative from ABC, there's a representative from Cambridge Res Alliance, ACT as well, and folks who work for direct service providers, and then also property owners in our city who, I think if we're having a conversation about relocation assistance and other, some of these other programs, we'll have to negotiate and work through some details with them.
Okay, so, excuse me, so we have to place the late communication on file, and then once we do that, you can, so on placing the communication on file, all those in favor say aye, those opposed nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Zondervan.
Do we need to vote to take it off the table?
It's not on the unfinished business, so it's fine.
Oh, okay.
So on Councilor Zondervan's motion to refer legal opinion on Portland's relocation assistance ordinance to the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Task Force on Tenant Displacement, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed nay. The ayes have it, and it is so referred. Communications on a motion by Councilor Simmons to place communications 1 through
Applications and
I always
petitions?
forget that. It's at the bottom of my book.
We have something on number 3, it's a non-illuminating.
Okay, so we have, okay. So on applications and petitions, we have to pull number 3 for an amendment. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 4.
Pleasure of the council. On adopting 1 and 2, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed nay. The ayes have it. Number 3, this is an application was received from Citizens Bank requesting permission for 1 illuminated projecting sign and 7 awnings at the premises numbered 822 Somerville Avenue. Approval has been received from Inspectional Services, Department of Public Works, Community Development Department, and no abutter response. The amendment, it's a non-illuminating sign, projecting sign. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
So let me just add, so on the amendment, and then we can discuss it as amended. On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. the amended applications in front of us. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The application says that there is no copy on the awnings, and then the graphic shows the Citizens Bank sort of starburst logo, and it's not clear from the renderings whether the awnings would include the logo or why the logo is on the drawings. No copy to me means they're blank awnings, but if they have the Citizens Bank logo, then that really isn't
Blank.
the intent. That isn't blank. And I just have to say that in combination with the Target red and the green, it looks like a Christmas store. It is hideous. So I agree with the people who are fed up. I mean, the fact that there's a bank there is really unfortunate to begin with, and the fact that now the building looks like a Christmas store year-round is even more unfortunate.
Pleasure of the council. I'm looking at you, Councilor Carlin.
Thank you for encouraging me
This
to
is in
talk.
your wheelhouse, Councilor.
I think Target was actually against the city rules in the same building as I consider this. When I was a consultant to community development, a band of the same color was considered all signage as the sign band continued. And if it's of a unique color associated with the use, and that was before the rules we put in. I have very mixed feelings about this. By the way, I know we voted on one, and I'm not changing that, but there were no dimensions in the proposal, and there were no city approvals associated with it. And this is the second time MIT's application has been that way, just as a side comment.
Thank you. I'm concerned about what I heard at public comment, that there was not a lot of outreach, if any, to the community. I would think I know Porter Square has a very robust neighborhood association that they don't miss much. So that concerns me. So
Charter right?
we could charter rate it. Would you like to do that?
I would like to do that, and I would like to have the applicant contact Ruth Riles of the Porter Square, whatever it's called, Neighborhood Association.
Yeah. Okay. We now move to number 4. A zoning petition has been received from Melissa Grippo and Christian Grippo et al. Requesting the maximum ratio of floor area to lot area. The question comes on referring to the Ordinance Committee and Planning Board for a hearing and report. Pulled by Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pulled this because there was some questions about it in public comment. I did want people to understand what this was about. This is a proposal for a hotel on the lot that includes the former Emma's Pizza on Broadway. And I guess they're essentially upzoning the entire district for hotels, but it's really for that specific lot to build a hotel there. So just want people to understand that that's what it is. And, I know it's just a procedural vote tonight to send it to the Ordinance Committee, but so people know what this is about.
Thank you. And thank you for pointing that out, that just so if folks are in opposition to this procedure, we have to send this to ordinance, so there'll be a discussion. Councilor Carlo.
That was useful knowing the site, because I actually assumed it was a different site, another one-story building, larger site. And if the petitioner is here, we have a different process than the planning board on any upzoning. And that includes the character and of the building, even if it's preliminary, to understand the implications. On the other hand, I realize this is a small site, and it's like a chip of the tooth, like I have, on the block, and we indeed do want that filled. And the problem with hotels is it's not really residential. And it's not fully commercial. It's residential in spirit, but commercial in use. So how that's interpreted. I think the size of the lot helps this candidate a lot. And I never thought of how we could integrate that into zoning, but it's an interesting issue, and I hope they reach out to both Councilor Kelly and I sooner rather than later to discuss this.
Mr. Mayor?
No comments from the audience, Mr. Barrett.
I
You get
realize,
appointed to one committee and you think the rules don't apply to you.
I realize now that I have been reached out to, but I didn't know that was the subject on the table. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Without expressing an opinion one way or another, because I really don't know enough about the specifics of the petition, it is only an upzoning for the hotel use. Other uses are already permitted at a 4.0 FAR. So I think, the term upzoning sends, rings alarm bells in people. So we're talking about a use that, for whatever reason, is at a lower FAR than other uses on the exact same site would be. So I'm eager to hear how this all works. Thank you.
If I could add, Mr. Mayor, on
Councilor
that
Carlin.
point, residential is a lower FAR to promote commercial, which I think is in favor of this upzoning, at least in conceptual. However, an upzoning can be a change of use as well. Again, this is a small site, and I think that has to be taken into consideration as having a less than major impact. Thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing further on referring to the Ordinance Committee and Planning Board for hearing and report, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to communications, and on a motion by Councilor Simmons to place 1 through 6 on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to resolutions on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring forward resolutions 1 through 13, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Would anyone like to pull Councilor Simmons?
I'd like to pull number 3.
Yeah. And pleasure of the council. I'm going to pull number 12 as well. Councilor Simmons, on the balance, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Resolution number 3, a resolution on the death of Muriel Turk.
Thank you. I know many of us, myself in particular, were very saddened to hear of the death of Mrs. Muriel Wellington Turk. Mrs. Turk just a few months ago celebrated her 100th birthday, which was quite wonderful. This is a woman who came here 70 years ago and made her home here. Was married to General Turk, who preceded her in death, and is the mother of a phenomenal woman, Dr. Carolyn Turk. Right to her death, she was vibrant, interesting, funny, and informative. I'm sad to see her passing, but she did have, I would like to say, a rich and rewarding life as a classroom teacher in the city of Boston, a civil rights activist. What most people don't know, she served on the Civic Unity Committee for over 2, maybe 3 decades. And Civic Unity, as most of us know, was the city's first civil rights, anti-racism, organization for the city. A member of the Girl Scouts, and well after she retired and before she had moved to Santa Maria Hospital, the kids from the Tobin School would come and sing to her happy birthday at the foot of her porch. Just an extraordinary, extraordinary woman, and I certainly will miss her. I will always be able to remember her in the actions and the presence of her beloved daughter, Dr. Carolyn Turk, but certainly sad. It's a very, very sad day, but she will certainly be missed. I know you and I, Mr. Mayor, put in that we would put up a memorial for her, which we did not get up before her passing, but I still think it's important that we do to celebrate her life. So it's not a tragedy other than that it's here we will celebrate, memorialize, and keep ever dear a true gem. If Cambridge was a crown, she would be the brightest jewel.
Thank you. And I'll just say quickly that the last time I saw Mrs. Turk was just a few months ago when I was at Sancta Maria for their anniversary, whenever that was in the summer. And she didn't know at first that I was there. And then when they announced that I was there and I said a few words, she immediately, at 100, called me over to tell me that I missed her birthday party and she was upset about that, but also to talk to me about the public schools. And so, even up until, her 100th birthday and after her 100th birthday, she was still sharp as a tack and with it, and really cool lady. So my thoughts and go out to Dr. Turk and the family.
Just, if I may, my colleague just asked, had the funeral come and gone? It has not. She will be, her funeral will be in Boston, but for those that want to attend her wake, it'll be Friday from 4 to 7 at Keith's.
And I will, I was going to do this at the end, but the school committee budget hearing that was scheduled for Saturday is going to be rescheduled so that we can attend the services.
Very good.
So on adoption, making unanimous upon adoption, all those in favor say aye, those opposed nay. The ayes have it. And then I pulled number 12, which is a resolution on the death of Lee Litchfield. Lee, longtime Cambridge resident, worked at Massey's Hardware for many, many, many years. Probably one of the most genuine, sincere people I have ever met. She lived in the Manning senior housing, passed away at the age of 60 this last week after some complications that brought her to the hospital, and it really turned very quickly. And she was just an amazing person, and I just wanted to acknowledge her because she brought lots of smiles to a lot of people. So we'll miss her too. On making unanimous upon adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy orders let's mix it up a little, on a motion by Councillor Mallon to bring policy orders before us for discussion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Councillor Mallon.
Can I pull number 5, please?
Yep. Pleasure of the Councillor Zondervan.
Number 1, please.
Councillor Carlone.
Number 6, please.
Mr. Mayor?
I got Vice Mayor and then
Number 4, please.
Councillor Toomey.
Number 8.
8. Anything else? On the balance, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We go back to policy order number 1, that the city manager is requested to review the city's communications and emergency response policies and protocols related to flooding resulting from infrastructure failures. This was filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councillor Zondervan, Councillor Kelly, pulled by Councillor Zondervan, but Vice Mayor, you were the main sponsor?
Yeah, I mean, I think Councillor Zondervan would like to suggest an amendment, so I...
Sure. Councillor Zondervan.
Thanks. The main suggestion is that we refer this to the Transportation and Utilities Committee.
That's the refer to
Transportation and Utilities Committee for a hearing. I will say that, that we've been discussing the particular flood on Craigie Street. I think this is the 3rd week now that it's come up. And a lot of people have referred to the age of the pipe that broke. But there's a lot of research out there that tells us that it's not the age of the pipe so much, it's the corrosion that causes these failures in the iron pipes. And of course, we've heard and discussed that our water in Cambridge is particularly corrosive compared to alternatives. So I think we really need to consider that issue, because what we're essentially doing is, we're saying, well, our water is really cheap, but then we're kind of socializing these costs that result from providing the water the way that we do. So there is a technology that can remove the chlorides that make it corrosive. There is a cost associated with implementing that. There is also, as we're seeing, a cost associated with not providing that protection to our residents and businesses. So I think this warrants a discussion both in terms of how we deal with these disasters and also how we treat our water so that we have fewer of these catastrophes in the future.
Thank you, Councilor. Any further discussion? So the amendment is to refer to transportation and utilities. On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On the order as amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Before we go on to the next one, I was remiss in I just want to make a quick announcement that Irina Colombo from Congresswoman Presley's office was here. She left and she came to the resource fair and then stayed to help get a sense for the Congresswoman about some of the issues being discussed in Cambridge, and I neglected to introduce her. So if she's watching, thank you for coming. We now move to number 4, that the city manager is requested to consult with the appropriate departments on the feasibility of eliminating the use of plastic water bottles at city and school events, filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, myself, Councilor Zondervan, and Councilor Mallon. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to have finally gotten this on our agenda. I think maybe it was suggested quite a few years ago, but I think at this point public awareness is quite high that our addiction to convenience plastics of all kinds is getting us into a lot of trouble, and that we've all gotten very lazy, I have to say it, in terms of how we manage disposable takeout containers and so forth. So just asking the city to step up and be a leader and to stop offering what in the industry is known as convenience water in single-serving plastic bottles, I think will send a sign to the public and hopefully to others that there are other ways to serve water without being too preachy. I have learned to carry a metal water bottle with me. For the first bit of time, I would forget it in a lot of places and forget to fill it and so forth. But now it's just sort of like if I don't have my water bottle in my hand, I feel like I don't have my car keys or whatever other thing that people, their phone, have to have in their hands. So it is possible. Hydration is certainly important. And, we have in most public buildings where meetings are held and often in public parks, we have the ability to have water fountains or to bring large kegs of water that can be filled with reusable bottles. We can do a public awareness campaign, and we can really use this as an opportunity to get other members of the public aware that it is possible to drink water in non-plastic containers. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councilor Mallon and Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to the Vice Mayor for her leadership on this issue. I was just at a couple of city events over the past week where there was children, so we've got kids in our community and we're giving them small plastic bottles of water. And I think if we're going to be modeling good behavior around not using single-use plastics, we really have to commit as a city. Like I said, if we're modeling this behavior for future generations, we need to take this step. So I thank you again for your leadership, and I'm proud to be sponsoring this, and I hope that the rest of the council can join us.
Mr. Mayor? I got Councilor Siddiqui and then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I was upset that I didn't get asked to be on this. And then I thought back as to why. And I have to share this story, even though it makes me look bad. A year ago or so, I think I was giving a ride to the vice mayor, and there was a huge bottle, because of my mom, of water, huge plastic water bottles. And I just remember thinking, oh, she's going to see this, and I hid it, but I had to reveal it. But anyway, I'm very much supportive of this. I think we had an event this past weekend, and there were a ton of bottles, and it's wasteful. And so I look forward to seeing how we can work with the city and schools to combat that use. So thank you.
Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to vote no on this policy order. I prefer that we would use the word encourage. What I'm concerned about is that, especially the athletic events at the high school and at the grammar schools and the gymnasiums, that, you know, when you have kegs of water and the water is on these hardwood floors, that's going to pose some serious injury risk to a student. So I am concerned about that. So I hope there's a way that we could reword this, but in the present form, I'll be voting no, and I would suggest that the council show the example. These water bottles are in our refrigerator right now that we get on a Monday night meeting, so, and they've been here for many, many years. So I suggest that we would start the example and by eliminating these from our green room. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to thank the Vice Mayor as well. Somewhere, I think he now lives in Somerville, former school committee member Luke Schuster is dancing because he brought this forward on the school committee about eliminating plastic water bottles about 10 years ago plus. And I don't, the stomach wasn't there for it, or, you know, we weren't quite at that point in thinking about it. So I'm sure he's going to be very happy. And I would just point out that we're talking about that the city manager consult with the appropriate departments on the feasibility. So just so folks know that, you know, this isn't something that's going to be instituted tomorrow, but we'll get a report back as to, you know, I'm assuming it's possible. It's more work, I would guess, if you're setting up a city meeting and you now have to get jugs and fill them as opposed to just carrying in a case of water, but we'll figure that out. But we're just asking for a report back on the possibility of this. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some things take a very long time, but persistence certainly counts. And I only say that because it's an excellent idea, but I remember the days, I just want to affirm what you're saying, but also say Henrietta, former Mayor Henrietta Davis, did this for years. And it's interesting. I think if she were still to be serving, she'd be quite pleased with the work that we're now doing in a more zealous way. But she constantly would tell us, browbeat you and make you embarrassed if you had a plastic water bottle. And so she worked diligently trying to bring us along. So I'm pleased that we're continuing to go forward with this work. But I think it's also important, I just want to acknowledge that she really did extraordinary work, not to take anything away from you, Madam Vice Mayor, but, you know, Mayor Davis, Councilor and former Mayor Henrietta Davis worked very long on trying to bring us along, and her work has really begun to take in root, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. If there's nothing further on adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Councilor Toomey is recorded in the negative. We now move on to number 5. City Council, asking that the City Council support House Bill 2395, an act to further provide a rental arrearage program, filed by Councilor Mallon, Councilor Simmons, myself, and Councilor Siddiqui. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's been a lot of concern on this council about protecting Cambridge residents who are currently housed through much stronger tenant protections, and that stabilizing those tenants needs to be a priority of this council. There have been some important bills filed at the State House this legislative session that can offer these stronger tenant protections, and House Bill 2395 would go a long way in creating those protections by returning to the pre-2003 state-funded rental arrearage programs, which provided cash assistance to pay back rent, allowing 96% of those who received assistance to remain in their homes. One of our delegation, Representative Decker, is one of the lead sponsors of this bill, and with this policy order, we would indicate the City Council's desire to move forward with this reinstatement of this important tenant protection program, and would encourage others in our delegation to sign on and champion this as well at the State House.
Thank you. Pleasure of the Council. Thank you, Councilor Mallon. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to policy order number 6, that the city manager is requested to direct the appropriate city departments to conduct a formal and professional financial assessment of the additional value created for the owner petitioner by upzonings for developments of more than 50,000 square feet. This was filed by Councilor Carlone, Vice Mayor Devereaux, and Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you,
Carlone.
Mr. Mayor. During the process last term of working with MIT on the Volpe upzoning, Councilor Chung and I were able to negotiate with concurrence of this council pretty extensive mitigation elements and improvements in the region that help the neighborhoods as well, including a training center, job training center, and the MIT ownership of the Grand Junction, building additional dormitories sooner rather than later, and the community itself, with our help, advocated for a community building. And in that process, we realized, Councilor Chung and I, and later Councilor Kelly, that indeed there is great value in increased zoning. And in all fairness, in a number of cases, there are some negative impacts of increased zoning in adjoining neighborhoods, whether it's North and West Cambridge or East Cambridge, Wellington, Harrington, down the line, Cambridgeport, and in other neighborhoods as well. And I reached out to other cities and found out through one colleague in Boston that they've been doing this evaluation that we've written this policy order based on for 30 years in Boston. I found out New York similarly, even smaller cities have something like this. Instead of shooting from the hip and guessing what the impacts are and what's fair. And then I remembered Broad Institute, which I think the city got $1 million, maybe it was $2 million. But in fact, the square footage cost of land, per square foot around Kendall Square is in the $100 to $200 range for commercial uses. You might recall the CRA negotiated $72 a square foot for new housing in Kendall Square, which by the Boston standard was low. And so all this is trying to do is to ascertain what the value is, and then through negotiation, which frankly is only in the council, the planning board does not negotiate the kinds of improvements that we're talking about that Volpe developed, to have an understanding of what that value is and to work with neighborhood needs, to work with city council goal needs, as well as infrastructure that the city needs. And before us are 4 upzonings that we're aware of. Some are before us soon, others will be before us and are now going through the neighborhood process. I don't have to mention them at this point. We learned of another one tonight, although that one is a relatively small one. And it's just being a fair process to understand the implications. And I hope you fully support this. All this is getting getting the city involved and estimating what that impact is. I've been assured by people in the profession in Boston that it's, as I wrote here, $100 to $200 per additional foot. I've mentioned this, perhaps another councilor has too, to at least 2 developers who are asking for substantial upzonings. Now, what people have offered in return, whether it's improvements on the Grand Junction, improvements in city infrastructure, improvements in open space, would be considered part of this amount. It's not in addition to what developers have offered. elsewhere. It's just understanding what the package in all fairness should be and then working from there as a council. So I hope you'll all support this, and thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure of the council. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilor Carlone for putting this on the agenda. It's, I think, overdue, and I know that when we were negotiating the Volpe zoning, I felt very much as if I was negotiating not from a position of strength, but from a position of weakness, because I didn't have the same information that they did. And, I wondered, as one always does in hindsight, what we'd left on the table. And, we'll never know. But had we had a better idea, or at least any idea of what the value we were giving them was in comparison to various costs, I think we would have had more confidence in the way we voted. So I look forward to discussing this further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question for my colleague. In Boston, do they, as part of this report, provide future taxes that will be paid? So property taxes or personal property taxes for lab space or restaurants? I just don't know if that's part of their process or part of a process that exists elsewhere.
It is elsewhere. If I could respond, Mr. Mayor, excuse me. It is elsewhere, and the answer is no. Taxes are a byproduct of the building that is built and profits being made in that building. And you probably all know that lab space in Cambridge rents higher than lab space in San Francisco. So this is a highly profitable endeavor. And obviously, we have to learn from the development entity, and that's part of the discussion. I can tell you, Councilor Chung and I expect Councilor Kelly and I will have in-depth comments with all, and we will report to you. The interesting thing about MIT was MIT paid a fortune for the land, more than double, possibly 3 times more than any development entity. And the city had already advertised that they felt that a certain density was appropriate. So we were in a different position. That's why if we can get the information sooner, we're, I think, in a better position to negotiate. Do I think we're going to get the max each time? No. I think we have to learn of what the whole process is, and that hopefully will happen.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
So, Councilor Carlone, thank you. I'm inclined to, I think that support this. I think the information would be good. I am going to charter rate it now because I do have some things I want to go over with you. I want to look at Boston. I just didn't get a chance to get to it. And I think some people have raised some concerns with me, and I just want to have an opportunity to talk about that. So you and I can get together.
By all means, I do want to add that, of course, certain people are concerned. People I met with were concerned, and they're looking at hundreds of thousands of additional square feet. And if this truthful way at looking at impacts and the value of what they're asking for makes them rethink that, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I just want to go over something. I'll fall back to my motto of I want developers to scream but not run away, kind of thing. And I have a few conversations that I want to have on that. So
that's fine, but if I might add, I've heard that since 1976, and not one went away, even though we downzoned East Cambridge significantly.
All right. We'll discuss. I'm not against it. I need.
And keep in mind where if I might add, where density makes sense. And I know of one site that I think is dense. The height might be insufficient, at least on an edge. I think an increase probably does, from an urban design point of view, make sense. Just like I think First Street retail intensity makes sense. So it isn't all or nothing. It's what's the right number.
So let's get together. Now, so I'll exercise my charter right on that one. We now move on to number 8, that the city manager is requested to instruct the city solicitor, excuse me, in consultation with the Election Commission to report back on the legality and constitutionality of the proposed Cambridge publicly financed municipal election program and the Cambridge Municipal Election People's Pledge. Excuse me, this was filed by Councilor Toomey and Councilor Kelly, pulled by Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to, once again, we've certainly talked about this publicly financed campaign for many, many years, and we put something forward last April. It's almost a year ago, and we're waiting for a report from the city solicitor and the Election Commission on the feasibility of doing this. There's been no action taken, no report back, and we're going to waste another campaign cycle. We're going to have nothing in place for the November election, which I think is a tragedy. All we do, we certainly talk about this issue many, many times and the importance of this, but it just doesn't seem to want to come to fruition. So I think another election cycle is going to come and go, and there'll be a lot of candidate debate nights, and everybody was saying how much they want this, but it hasn't happened. Thank you. I'm just urging the city solicitor and the election commission from the city manager to at least report back to us on this. We had the hearing, government operations, on November 14th. It's a year ago it was filed.
I've got Vice Mayor Devereaux, then Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, in the same committee hearing, there was a second order that was also part of the report that I would like to add to this policy order as an amendment, and it reads that the city manager be and hereby is requested to form a committee or working group to help the city council work through the goals and potential options of publicly financed elections before, whoops, my screen just went dead, before the summer recess, with a view in mind of place a non-binding question on the ballot. So this November, we have the opportunity to, if we get this committee formed and at work, to actually assess the public's interest in some method of public campaign financing. And but there's a deadline. We ran into this 2 years ago when a group of residents submitted a petition that merely asked a non-binding question that they wanted to place on the ballot, and procedurally it was killed, and the deadline passed and they couldn't get it on the ballot. So we still have time, but again, we need to form that committee, and that was also adopted as part of the committee report that was on the December 3rd agenda, I believe. So the clerk, you should have that language.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the clerk because she has some thoughts.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Vice Mayor, this has already been adopted. We can't adopt the same motion in the same legislative session. What I could do is raise the issue that you have brought that this point up, that this order has been adopted and no action has been taken on it. I can send a communication to the city manager about that.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. That's what I wanted to say, is that if we're going to ask for one, report back that we asked at the same committee meeting, why aren't we asking for the other thing, which was to form this committee? So thank you. That's my intent.
Madam Clerk. Oh, sorry. Originally, the Vice Mayor said an amendment to this. You're talking about a communication. Can she amend? I just want to make sure we do it. Are you saying that you're going to?
I guess I would like to ask that to add an amendment to Councilor Toomey's order, which asks for a report back on one element of that same committee hearing, that the report back also include.
Okay.
I mean, essentially, this policy order is reminding the city solicitor that there's something that we would like, that we asked to hear about and haven't heard back in 2 months. This is asking the city manager the same thing, because they're both on a deadline and they're both related.
Madam Clerk, do you have the language, or do you want? Okay. I've got Councilor Carlo, and then I'm going to come back, Councilor Toomey. Councilor Carlo.
I'll be relatively quick. As we all know, and was alluded to, there's been a history of policy orders asking for this, and in 2016, I was part of one headed by Councilor Mazin, Councilor Chung, Councilor Devereaux, and myself, And we did get a response on November 13th, a year later, November 13th, 2017, although it didn't address all the issues we're talking about now. And the gist of it is, obviously we'll need a home rule amendment because state law prohibits municipalities from passing ordinances that regulate elections. However, the Commonwealth itself has a statutory framework for limited public funding for statewide offices, interestingly. And there are two general legal restrictions, which I won't get into. But this, in other words, is more complex than even the level we're talking about. So I'm assuming that the state issues would become part of any discussion as well. And again, that was from the manager on November 13th, 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of putting something, a non-binding question on the November ballot, I don't know if we need a committee to do that. We can, there's a process for the citizens to do that without a committee. So hopefully that could take place, but I don't know who would staff the committee and run the committee, but to just have a committee to do something that's already in place that can be, there's a process to do that, to get any type of petition on the ballot in November. So.
Councilor Zondervan.
But I'll move the adoption. I want to this is awful.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually share my colleague's concern that nothing's going to happen, Councilor Toomey, that we'll pass this order and we won't hear back in time to do anything about it. If we truly want to explore publicly financed campaigns, what we should do, as I suggested in the committee hearing, is that we come up with some very specific experiments that we can try out that don't require a home rule petition, that don't require lots of legal wrangling, that will give us information back about what the electorate prefers or would like to see happen, because we don't really know. And so we just go around in circles trying to find the best solution, but we don't even know what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So I would really urge us, if we're serious about tackling this issue, that we think about what can we do that is small and contained, that will give us feedback from the electorate on what they're really looking for in terms of publicly financed elections.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor.
In all due respect, I would suggest that everybody reread what I had put forward, my proposals on this campaign, public campaign finance report, what we can do. And so I would just suggest everybody reread that.
So my, Councilor Vice Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but my thought of a committee is also to discuss how we would do this. Like I'm ready to move this. I was on one of those orders too at one point to look at this idea, but I'm not sure that I agree with everything that was put out. With all due respect, Councilor Toomey, in terms of the how much money, and I'm not sure I agree with everything that's in there. So I think we have to have some discussion about what it would actually look like, and I think that's what the committee. Not so much the ballot question, but the committee would. Am I correct? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think we need some additional help to do this, because, as I think I said in the committee hearing, and I really don't want to have the committee hearing again tonight, because that was a really long report and a very long and detailed discussion. And if one reads the committee report, we're basically saying all the same things. The reason for having some working group, and it doesn't have to be a huge group of people, is to help counselors who, obviously, some of us, all of us probably have a vested interest in how this works. And so I think we need some independent advisors to remind us of best practices and to help us work through some of this. So, and then we can test, as Councilor Zondervan recommends, through a non-binding ballot initiative, if we have public support, because if these are going to be publicly financed elections, we need the public support because we're going to ask them to,
Right.
you know,
To pay for
finance
it.
us one way or the other, right?
And I would
mean,
and I would say this, Vice Mayor. You know, I know we heard a lot of people say that the money inhibits people from running. There were 27 candidates last time, and in the last 3 elections for council, there have been over 20. You know, people. The threshold to get on the ballot is not high, and I think we even have some councilors within that are elected. Some spend a lot more money, some spend a lot less money. A lot of it depends on your individual circumstances. If you know, I often spend more money. That was often because I had another job and I had 4 kids and I had my council job, my social worker job. I had kids. I couldn't go out and leaflet all day the way someone who doesn't have those. I had to hire people. I had to raise more money. I would love not to raise more money, but you know, the circumstances are all different, and so people just assume the negativity if someone raises more money. We don't have the national problems, I don't think, here. But I also don't think it's not like there's a shortage of people running. So, but I do think it's important. I do, again, like I said, I was on a policy order in favor of this and looking at this before, so I do want to look at it. I want to see what the details are, but I'm not sure it's quite the obstacle that some folks think it is. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In other situations where we've diagnosed as a council that we need to form a working group or a task force, we've just done that. We did that with the arts. We're doing that with the tenant protections. We could just do the same here.
Okay, so why don't I will talk to the city manager and get an idea, and if the sense is that this isn't going to move, I will appoint a task force to look at it. I can do that. So, so we have an amendment. The amendment, do you need to read it? Okay, the amendment basically is to add the other order that was passed in the governance committee to be looked at. So on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On the order as amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to committee reports. The question comes on number 1, accepting the report and placing on file. Pleasure of the committee. All those in favor? Do you want to talk about it?
Just a quick comment. There was more than half of the council at this meeting. It might have been 5 total. And it was an in-depth discussion on urban recommendations, urban form recommendations. We each had comments, and the department, community development, felt they couldn't change the recommendations, even to further explain what the recommendations were saying, which a number of us found rather odd. So what this means is really our input on Envision has been minimal, and that it's the next phase where we have to refine or elaborate more when the negotiation occurs, which seems to me counterproductive, but it is what it is, and I accept that. So you will catch that notion in the notes, is what I'm getting to, and so be it.
Thank you, Councilor. On accepting the report and placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to committee report number 2. The question comes on accepting the report and placing on file. Pleasure of the council. On accepting the report and placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Committee report number 3, we never took care of it when we pulled it before, so the question comes on accepting the report and placing on file. Question comes on passing to a second reading as amended. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. There are no roundtable minutes, communications, and reports from other city officers. There are 2. Pleasure of the council. Move to place on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any late orders or late resolutions, Madam Clerk? We have a late order, which means we need to move suspension. Roll call.
On suspension of the rules to introduce a late policy order, Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux. Councilor Kelly. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui. Councilor Simmons. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the rules are suspended on affirmative vote with 7 in favor, 1 recorded in the negative, and 1 recorded as absent. And the policy order is that the city manager be and hereby is requested to work with the appropriate city departments to televise the Human Services and Veterans Committee hearing on February 26 from 10 to 12. Was submitted by Councilor Mallon and Councilor Siddiqui.
On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any late resolutions?
Nope.
No late resolutions. Any announcements? Councilor Mallon, you want to talk about socks for a minute?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to talk about socks for a minute. So we're having our second annual Warm Hearts for Warm Feet Wool Sock Drive to benefit homeless shelter residents at Bay Cove and Caspar. We are collecting in 2 locations, one downstairs at City Hall and at the Cambridge Police Department on 6th Avenue. We will be collecting from now until Valentine's Day. So get your wool socks. Please help support this incredibly important mission. We have been told that there are no socks in any of the shelters right now, and they can really help to decrease the amount of frostbite for our most vulnerable residents. So any help would be appreciated. If you want to donate socks, if your company wants to donate socks, we would be very, very happy to take them. We've been tweeting out the information, so please share it widely.
Thank you. Councilor Siddiqui.
And that ends on the best day of the year, February 14th, right? Valentine's Day, so keep that in your calendar. We have another event, Cambridge Digs Deep event coming up. I want to thank everyone who could make it this past Saturday. We had over 100 people, good turnout. On February 7th, here at 5:30, we'll be hearing from the city, Cambridge Public Schools, and the Cambridge Police Department on concrete actions they're taking to tackle race inequity. So please come. I'll do another announcement next week.
Thank you. And the mayor's disaster relief fund is still accepting contributions. We have only raised about $14,000, and there are 22 people displaced. And I know, obviously, what happened on Berkshire Street was much larger, a lot more people. We needed a lot more resources. But the loss that these folks, even though it's a smaller number, they still have to replace everything too. And so please, reach out to your networks and see if we can't raise a little bit more money to help these folks out. Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank you and your office, and along with Will Gersten from Puritan and a number of area restaurants, and East Cambridge Business Association is hosting a fundraiser this Saturday from 6 to 9 at the St. Anthony's Band Hall at 575 Cambridge Street, and encourage as many people. Tickets are $40, and about 7 or 8 different restaurants and different breweries that will be providing the refreshments. So it's a good cause, and it'll be a good opportunity to raise some additional funds for you. So I want to thank you and your office for helping facilitate that.
Thank you, Councilor Toomey. Anything else? On a motion by Councilor Toomey to adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.